Good evening and welcome to the Town of Sandwich Finance Committee meeting for July 15th, 2025. Tonight's meeting is being aired on Sandwich Community TV and will be available for replay. In addition, Taylor from the Sandwich Enterprise is recording our meeting as well. As a note, our Town Finance Director, Bill Jennings, and our new Finance Committee member, Jeff Picard, are joining us remotely this evening, and as a result of a Finance Committee member joining us remotely this evening, we will take roll call votes when a vote is needed. It is 6 p.m. and I'm calling our meeting to order. Let's begin by rising for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As we begin this evening, and as I mentioned, I want to welcome Jeff Picard to our committee. Jeff most recently served on our town's planning committee, and we're glad to have your experience, Jeff, your thoughts, and your voice joining us on the committee.
Thank you.
We do have a change in the order of our agenda this evening. The school department update will come before the update on the DPW fire substation project update. And as a reminder, let's remember to turn on our microphones and speak clearly into it so those at home and those with us in the auditorium can hear us well. We'll start off with public comment. Does anyone with us tonight wish to make a public comment as we get underway? Seeing none, we will move on to the minutes. Thanks to Sue James, our minutes from our most recent meeting on June 24th have been distributed in our agenda packet. Does anyone have any corrections, additions, or edits? Seeing none, could I have a motion for the June 24th minutes?
Motion.
Motion by Crystal, second by Nancy. Roll call vote. Crystal. Nancy.
Aye.
Matt.
Aye.
Kevin. Jackie?
Aye.
Jim?
Aye.
And Jeff?
I'm going to abstain.
Abstain. 8 yeas, 1 abstention. With that, Bud, it looks like you have an update for us based on the state budget being approved by the governor recently. Can you take us through that and any other town-related matters of importance?
Sure, and I'll just say the same thing that I did earlier. For the people to hear us on Zoom, just make sure your green light's on when we speak. So when the packets went out last Thursday or Friday, the conference committee was the most recent group that had chimed in on the budget, and then the governor signed off on what the conference committee did since then. So I left a one-page, two-sided summary in front of your chairs. So the front just shows what was approved at town meeting, and in the middle at the top on the heading in red, it says approved at town meeting. And then on the back, it shows you with the final state budget numbers plugged in what it looks like. So I've highlighted in yellow what any changes were. So I want to stress that we have a much bigger balance, which is what we hope, because we want to be safe when we go to town meeting. I want to stress, though, it's not like we can just spend that. Like, it's what was appropriated at town meeting. So we don't have a dollar more than what town meeting voted in terms of what we can spend. If we tried to go back and use any of that extra, it would require a town meeting vote before we set our tax rate. So we're in really good shape, which is good news. It's probably not worth it at this meeting, knowing the two topics, to go through and nitpick the cherry sheet. But if we want to do that at our next meeting, Bill and I would be glad to do it. And really the only other substantive update I wanted to give you is the committee voted at the end of June to support up to $100,000 in reserve fund transfers to cover any departmental deficits. We ended up only having to use about $50,000 of that. So as the committee knows, the balance in that fund when we start the fiscal year is $500,000. So we returned $450,000 and we used roughly half of what the committee authorized us to be able to go up to. So really the one true expense was in our fire department overtime. That being said, it's much less than it has been the last several years. So positive movement on that front. And really, that's it in terms of updates.
All right, thank you, Bud. Any questions for Bud at this point? Nancy?
Yeah, just a quick question. In the past, the selectmen have had to authorize or appropriate where the extra Chapter 70 money is going. Did they do that at their meeting that we couldn't hear?
They haven't. That has to go to town meeting. So if there's a decision made between the school committee, the select board, and the finance committee, we would have to go back to a town meeting to increase the school appropriation by that additional amount.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else for Bud? Seeing none, we'll move on to an update on Sandwich Public Schools. Throughout the budget season earlier this year, the Finance Committee invited our school superintendent, Dr. Mareshek, his team, and the school committee to join us at our meetings. It was evident to us that an ongoing dialogue with them is important in planning, given the schools represent over 60% of the town's total budget, and there are increasing capital needs that will need to be addressed soon. We're glad to have Dr. Marashek with us this evening to report the outcomes from fiscal year 25 and how you're anticipating the just underway fiscal 26 to shape up. Questions from our members were submitted to you earlier ahead of this meeting. Can you lead us through?
Sure. I've got
Discussion.
a few slides, hopefully not too many. Hopefully none of them will give you a popsicle headache. But good evening. It's great to be here. Happy summer, everybody. Really what I'm going to talk about is kind of how we're finishing off FY25, some of the projects that are happening, and I think none of them will be a surprise based upon the 2 meetings that we had during the budget cycle. I was asked to talk a little bit about enrollment and enrollment trends, particularly over the last 10 years, and how that compares to our staffing trends as well. Then some questions about value added as far as programs and services that we offer within the district that are kind of above and beyond what's legally mandated. And then there was just a couple kind of what I would characterize as quick hitter questions having to do with transfers that were implemented in FY25, and then also are there going to be any effects of some of the federal cuts that have been announced recently. So I know that that's a quick slosh, but I will do my absolute best. With regard to FY25, today being July 15th, our Director of Finance, Michelle Austin, is still closing everything out. I anticipate at our next school committee meeting of August 13th, we'll have kind of the full report. Happy to share that with you. But right now she's telling me essentially we are finishing completely where we thought we would finish as far as everything that was budgeted for FY25 has been expended. So we start FY26 in very, very good shape. I will have more of the specifics like that by the beginning of August. With regard to some of the work that is happening, if you have the fortune, or maybe I should say misfortune, of walking into Oak Ridge right now, it is thoroughly a construction zone. We have currently the last major project from the spring 22 debt exclusion, the HVAC project, approximately $5.2 million occurring. I know that this is not exactly the most fascinating picture, showing ductwork everywhere and copper piping, but we've had the team in doing the duct work, doing the electrical work, and right now good progress is happening. As you can see in those 2 pictures, from, I think one is the multi-purpose room and one is a classroom. They are basically hanging these classroom cassettes, which are kind of the devices that will provide air conditioning and heating, going to 3 different units that'll be on the roof, along with heat pumps. I will admit our new facilities director is the person who did those bullet points on the right. I'm not exactly an expert on energy recovery units, but you can see how it's progressing both on the first and second floor and also the exterior work. It's significant work because of duct work, the electrical work, and so on that's going on. But our new facilities director, Michael Ryan, is telling me that right now we are on target for our completion date of August 15th, which gives us 2 weeks before we start with students. Some other projects, and I think we've talked about these, we already have completed all of the new classroom door locks at Oak Ridge, so now Oak Ridge and Forestdale are complete. Oak Ridge project finished up on July 1st. We will commence the exterior security camera. If you recall, the largest chunk of the school department's capital item was the exterior security camera project to significantly upgrade. That project will commence next week. We are also targeting the first week of August to commence the refurbishing of the Oak Ridge baseball field. And we will be making an announcement very shortly from an outside grantor to do a outdoor garden project, raise garden beds for each and every single classroom at Forestdale. So over 30 raised garden beds, along with a partnership with the Wampanoag tribe to kind of integrate Wampanoag farming techniques and so on, with the goal of having next summer and spring kind of a Forestdale farm stand. So something that I am going to be speaking out at length at our next school committee meeting, but something that we're super excited about. So some of these slides may be you maybe have seen before during the budget presentation. I'd like to kind of go through these in detail so you kind of get the larger gestalt, so to speak. I know Matt, being a member of our district strategic planning team, definitely saw a lot of these, but I think they kind of tell an interesting story, and I think they kind of tell the full story of some of our successes, but some of our challenges as well. So we concluded this school year. This was our official October 1st enrollment with 2,149 students. You see the breakdown of Forestdale with 558, Oak Ridge with 673, Eights Are Wild at the middle high school, and OOD stands for out-of-district placements. Those are students who have some significant needs and therefore are sent out of district to some type of special education placement. However, they're still on our rosters. That's 30 for a total of 2,149 students. If you look at the trend over the last 10 years, as everybody has discussed, if you look at our K through 12 enrollment, it's a significant decline in that 10-year span. I came on board July 1st of 2022. That first October 1st enrollment, that was a real significant drop. You're talking about 140 students in one school year, but if you look over our last 3 school years, it's been fairly stable. And if you look at the projections for next year, as I gave in my budget presentation last winter, it's slated to be stable. If you look at our staffing during that same exact period of time, it's a little bit all over the place, and it's kind of understandable if you look at the COVID years, how it kind of peaked. I can say, and I don't know if I stress this enough in my budget presentation to you, but I know before the school committee there was significant discussion in looking at the data of 22-23 to where will we be opening on September 1st. We've had, largely through attrition, a reduction of about 35 FTEs. And these FTEs would be professional staff. So basically, anybody who's providing services to students, that would be teachers, it would be support staff like ESPs, administrators, and so on. So, the mindset has been budget right-sizing to kind of catch up with where we are with respect to enrollment. If you look at, again, projecting where we are and where we'll be going over the next 10 years, we subscribe, as most school districts do, to an organization known as NESDEC, the New England Staff Development Council, and twice a year they give us enrollment projections. Obviously, your first 5 years, because those babies have been born, are the best. Years 6 through 10 becomes a little bit shaky. But they look at migration in, migration out, new construction, and so on within the community. So you can see the picture shows for Sandwich a stabilization. So here's a slide that I showed our strategic planning committee to kind of look at challenges. And this stack bar chart shows how many kids live total, K through 12, within our community. And in blue is how many kids, K through 12, are in the Sandwich Public Schools, and that orange is other settings. So to me, you've got a dual-edged sword. You've got kind of the double whammy that, like most communities on the Cape, Sandwich has a declining population. I read that our most recent census, the median age in our community is 57. That's the median age. There's some of us around the table that might be pushing that, right? The challenge, and the second part of the double whammy is there's competition in the marketplace in the K-12 educational space. So to me, in looking at this data, the most important thing is to that bottom row that I created, percentage of students in settings other than SPS. I know I'm never going to get that down to 0%, but to continue to whittle away at that percentage of that stack bar of families looking for other options, quite frankly. When we look at last school year, other options, the biggest pain point for us is the transition between 8 and 9, when there's a lot of other high school options. But as you can see, Upper Cape Tech is the biggest challenge. 160 students in 9 through 12 that go to Sandwich last school year are enrolled there. 120 at Sturgis. St. John Paul II, 61. And you see all of the other options. Something that is good is, generally speaking, if you have at least a 2-to-1 ratio as far as kids choicing in versus choicing out, that's a good thing as far as some additional revenue. And last school year, we had 135 kids choice in and 60 choice out. So this slide has way too many colors, but the color coding is done for effect and kind of looking at our 8th to 9th grade attrition and retention. So if you look at the similar numbers as far as, for example, if you look at grade 8 in 2014, 261, and then you go to the next column, in the same red, 171, how many of our kids are sticking around? Okay, so to me, again, just like that previous slide, I want to look at that bottom row and continue to raise our retention rate, okay? Because the enrollment issues, at least on my watch over the last 3 years, we've had steady kindergarten enrollment. It's in the ballpark of 160, 165. The drop-off, if we're going to lose anybody, is between that 8th to 9th grade transition. And, it's kind of interesting. One of the things that I was asked to, provide some commentary on was value added, and really thinking about how do we bolster our programming at the middle high school so that kids truly have a sense of belonging, and there isn't a sense of, hey, I want to leave my community and look at other educational options. So what does this translate as far as our class sizes? We generally speaking, like in the early elementary grades, to be somewhere in the teens. So you can see our average around K is 17, 1 17, 2 18. Then when you get to Oak Ridge, it's kind of pushing that kind of low 20-ish kind of number. And then again, some of the challenge at 7 and 8 and looking at budget right sizing is, it's still a very, in my opinion, a reasonable, comfortable class size at 17, 19, and so on. We also shared the data at the school committee level as far as average class sizes by department. Again, this year's budget has 6.0 FTEs fewer as far as teaching positions. Those teaching positions, by and large, come from the middle high school. I think, again, very reasonable class sizes. Some jump out at me, but again, it's making decisions about programming. Okay, so I look at foreign language, and somebody could say, really, Joe? You're an average class size of 13 for foreign language? I can tell you offhand the overwhelming majority of those 267 kids are taking Spanish, but we offer French and Latin as well. Okay, so 2 years ago, an absolute legend in our community, Mary Alice Moynihan, retired. And we had, myself and Jeannie Nelson, had a debate around, do we continue with Latin? Well, it's an important academic language. It's the foundation of Romance languages. Again, making a decision about what serves the greater good, what serves some of our highest achieving students, and so on. So there's stories behind a lot of this, but again, it is also the process of right-sizing the budget. So I think it's important in context. I believe this was also in our budget document, a snapshot of our kiddos. 21% of our kids have IEPs, or individualized education plans, as they've been diagnosed with a disability. 23.3% of our students are defined as low income. That means they either qualify for free or reduced lunch, or they're receiving direct benefits from the government. Only 1.1% of our students are English learners. We are still very much an outlier with regard to that. We could travel, maybe about 6 or 7 miles to the east, and Barnstable is up to 23% of their students. Dennis Yarmouth is up to about 18% of its students. When you take your students that have disabilities, are low income, or are English language learners, and you combine them, it's a hair under 40% of our student body. It's 38.9%. So I was asked to kind of talk about what do we provide that is beyond what is legally required. Okay, I could probably produce like 80 slides on this topic. I chose not to because, it's July, okay, and I could talk a lot about this, but I decided to focus in on just 4 big picture items, and actually one of them was suggested in your email, Ed, and pre-K. And actually, this is kind of a mixed bag. Pre-K is not mandated, but actually it is mandated if a student of age 3 and 4 has a diagnosed disability, okay? So it's legally required for young children ages 3 to 5 who need some type of services that remedy their disabilities. Now realize our district, just like just about everybody, uses something called a peer-modeled integrated program where we intentionally mix students who are receiving services for their disabilities with their typical peers. As it is also typical, we charge tuition for pre-K for typical students, and for those students with disabilities, their families are not charged. So you see what we have now at Forestdale at the program. I don't mean to drone on, but you see the numbers there as far as what we put out for FY25, 7.3 FTEs. Now realize this would include, we have a program known as Spinnaker across all of our levels for students with the most significant needs, usually significant autism or some type of developmental disorder along that. That is inclusive, as we have a Spinnaker program for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. So the total is about 627,000. About 140,000 of that comes from a competitive pre-K grant that we've earned, and an additional 245,000 is through tuition. So the rest comes through our operational budget. The second piece, and I think this was also suggested in the email, is transportation. And this is an interesting piece. The law is actually, it's kind of convoluted language that says, well, you have to transport kids if they live more than 2 miles from the school, but their bus stop can only be 1 mile from the school. Like, okay, we're not going to have kids walk a mile to a bus stop. That's a little silly. And realize you only have to legally transport students in grades K through 6. Now, I can't think of a school district that says, okay, you've reached 7th grade, you're on your own, kid. So we do have transportation as an option for all students. You know, one of the key things, if you think about the location of our schools, you've got Forestdale right on 130, you've got Oak Ridge on Quaker Meeting House along with the high school. There really aren't a lot of kids that are within that walking distance of 1 mile, and with the exception of one big development, the mindset is with a lot of students, particularly the ones that live down in Forestdale off 130, the bus stop is going to be at the end of the street on 130. The bus is going to go by there anyway, so we pick them up. However, realize sometimes that becomes a challenge. I can remember distinctly my first week on the job, meeting with a mom who lived on Annie's Lane off of 130 heading into Forestdale, and being very upset about having to walk her 5-year-old and seeing how fast cars go on 130 and so on. So there's a real human side to this. For this school year, our contracted services with Lucini & Son, who does our busing, was about $1.8 million. It's the intent of the school committee to kind of do a utilization study this school year. Because it is a bit of a conundrum. We're cognizant of situations where you see a bus leaving the high school or leaving Oak Ridge and it's only half full. We do provide a seat for everybody. However, sometimes parental preference is, hey, I want to pick up my kid, or it takes too long for the bus to get to my home and my child has dance lessons or something to that effect. But But we really want to do that utilization study to kind of see what are some possible options. Keep in mind, the bus, our district does not charge for transportation. Many, I would say over half of municipal school districts do charge for transportation. Something that I do think should be highlighted that represents significant savings to our district is the fact that we do our own in-house special ed transportation. A lot of districts also contract that out. So we have a fleet of 15 vans. 12 of them do our out-of-district transportation. 3 do in-district for students who have mobility issues. For example, this past school year, we spent about $770,000 when you look at how much we paid drivers and monitors and for how much for van maintenance. My former district in Worcester County, Mendon-Upton Regional, in the same period of time with one fewer student out of district spent about $1.2 million. So doing that in-house represents significant savings. Then I think something that we do well and that we've put good resources into is just kind of counseling and mental health. It is kind of interesting, both our state School Counselors Association and the National Association recommend a student counselor ratio of 250 students to one counselor. However, there's only 2 states that meet that, and actually the average in Massachusetts is 364 to 1. Both at Forestdale and Oak Ridge, where we use a model where there's school social workers, you can see what the ratios are. The middle high school uses school guidance counselors, for academic and social emotional counseling. You can see they're below that 250 at 222 to 1. Furthermore, at the middle high school, we also have school social workers who do a lot of the mandated IEP counseling. They will also do groups with students. They're also a valuable connection between the school and the home, and also coordinate things like wraparound services. At the middle high school, we have 3 social workers, and that also is at roughly a 300 to 1 ratio. Something also that I think should be highlighted is now at all 3 schools, we have something called the Transitional Learning Classroom, or the TLC, which is usually staffed by a special educator and an ESP. And you have both students who receive special education services and those who don't, transitioning in and out. But it's essentially for students who have some type of either emotional or behavioral dysregulation. That is a significant investment. But as my last bullet point says, if you think about the cost benefit of an intervention like this, we've got 30 students in FY26 in out-of-district placements, putting out about $3.2 million in tuition. So the average out-of-district tuition is costing our district $108,000. Anything that you can do to keep your kids in district and keep them as long as possible, and oh, by the way, families want their children within the school districts, so something like that, yes, it's a value add, but it's a smart intervention that reaps benefits. And then last but not least, I do think we should talk about athletics. I know that at our last meeting, this was a last school committee meeting, this is a discussion. No, we're not mandated to do athletics, but obviously it is the right thing. And I think it's a source of tremendous pride for our community. This school year alone, 453 unique students, I don't mean to describe them, but individual students, 51% of our enrollment participated in at least 1%. We typically have about a 35 to 40% participation rate each season, which is stellar. Our finance subcommittee of the school committee spent at least 2 or 3 meetings kind of doing an analysis of participation data. It varies widely based upon the expenses that are associated with the sport as far as, obviously it's probably not a surprise with ice time. Boys hockey is going to be the most expensive. Something like girls middle school girls soccer is the least expensive. So it's a wide variation. But in the big piece is, FY24, which was a little bit more costly than FY25 for the simple reason of success, more teams making the tournament and therefore additional transportation costs and so on. We spent a little bit over $1 million in athletics. And, I think we're all on the same page with the value add that, and the school committee kind of has as its North Star. It's really about community, it's about teamwork, and most importantly, kids having a strong sense of belonging to their school community. So those are just, and again, I could get into detail talking about Knights Theater Company. I could talk about, a whole bunch of host of other programs that are a real source of pride and make our district special. But I chose to just kind of touch upon those 4 major areas. One question about transfers. In FY25, there was a grand total of 3 transfers within the operational budget. They all occurred at the same meeting. The grand total was about $166,000. The biggest chunk of that, $138,000, was just kind of reclassifying. Originally in the budget, I believe it was 2 positions were classroom teachers. They needed to be reclassified as specialists. And then we also, because of high enrollment, needed to transfer an additional $15,000 into the extracurriculars line to support the after-school clubs that we were running at Oak Ridge because that money became exhausted. The 7430 is just reclassifying copier supplies because we signed a new contract with a new photocopier company where the supplies are inclusive in the lease, and then $20,000 from athletic transportation to cover coaches' stipends. And then this delightful news. Last week we learned about money being withheld from districts across the country. The grand total is about $6 billion and $108 million from Massachusetts districts. Realize that they're kind of specific to English language learner education and kind of after school and summer programs. Virtually all of that money is going to urban or gateway communities. None of that is going to Sandwich because unfortunately we don't receive any funding for that. But as I would say, and I believe I said this when I presented to you back in February, there is concern about what is going to actually happen with the Department of Education. The conventional wisdom is now that 1,400 DOE employees have been effectively terminated, what happens to entitlement grant programs, okay? It's still a significant chunk when you take Title I, you take IDEA, and to a lesser degree, Title II. You're still talking about $800,000 that our district receives in federal funds through the Massachusetts Department of Education. So the good news is that $108 million doesn't affect us, but I think there's still a certain degree of uncertainty. So that's what I have as far as an update.
Thank you very much for responding to what was asked ahead of time and for the general updates. We really appreciate it. Questions, comments? Any follow-ups? Go ahead, Crystal.
I have one question. So the slide in the beginning that you had it was the blue and orange one with enrollment, and
The what?
with the enrollment, that slide there with the percentages. I know I'm not sure if this is something that, you would know, and I know the demographic is very different. Now, Cape Cod Tech and Nauset, is that similar to them with a Voc school?
As far as Nauset students going to Cape Cod Tech?
Yeah. Is that something you would know or not? It was just on
As far as percentage of kids in the Nauset Regional School
opting to go
District?
to tech rather than, yeah.
I don't know offhand.
Okay, I just didn't know if it was similar and,
I can tell you I can talk about Upper Cape Tech, though. I can tell you the highest percentage comes from Bourne. Second highest is probably us, and then right behind us is Falmouth.
okay.
We're the big three.
You mentioned the study for the bus transportation, but we also just renewed, if I remember correctly, our contract with the provider. Do we have the ability to adjust that year
We
to
certainly
year?
do, because the way the contract is it works per bus.
Super.
So, we're probably going to show maybe a slight savings because we've gone down from 20 runs to 19 runs. And again, the law is very clear. It's not like you can say, hey, I'm going to ship out to all 2,000 families, sign this affidavit that you'll never, use the bus again. Unfortunately, you can't do that. And part of that conundrum, too, is say you said, okay, we're going to charge something nominal so that you have skin in the game. Does that then drive more people to say, you know what, I'm just going to drop my kid off? And, I'm sure some of you have had the experience of drop off and pick up at the middle high school or at Oak Ridge. We already have some traffic congestion issues. So it's kind of a delicate balance of, we've got some work to do here.
Anything else, Nancy?
Yeah, just where are you in the next phase of maintenance requests or building requests, whatever I know you're looking at the status of where the buildings are now and what you'll be looking for in the future.
I think it's our intent to look at doing a facility condition assessment. Myself and Bud, along with Heather and Bill, had a meeting with Habib and Associates, which is an architectural firm, and they do this type of work. And matter of fact, I think they've done work in our district in the past. So it's our intent to kind of get a proposal from them to look at our 3 schools and also some of the key townside buildings to get the ball rolling on having that type of assessment done.
Very good. Bob?
That was really good.
Thank you.
You probably know a couple of those questions came from me, so I appreciate the time and effort you put into thinking about them. For purposes of tonight's conversation, though, I guess I'd just say 2 things. One, I'd ask you and the school committee to consider going forward, indicating in some way in the budget which of the funding is attached to what I'm going to call the legally required minimum, and what we're choosing. And I recognize it's a value add. I characterized it that way in my questions. But I think it's interesting to put into the budget in some way an indication of what's a choice, because it's a couple $1 million. The only other question I have for you is, as I was thinking about budgets and updates, I was perusing your materials from our recent budget discussions, and I realized that there were at least 20, perhaps more, full-time positions, full-time equivalent positions that were grant funded. And I just wanted to ask the question of those positions that are grant funded, how does your budget or the town's budget account and plan for benefit and retirement costs? I'm assuming that's separate from the grants?
That's a great question. I think it depends on the position. I think some of the positions may have benefits associated with them, some do not, based upon who the grantor is. So it really varies. It is kind of interesting, Bob. You asked me a question because we had like $1 million gap of something known as the CPPI grant, which is the Community Partnership for Pre-K. We just found out last week, I think it was July 7th, that we did get another $1 million for the community. We intentionally did not keep that in, but realized all of those positions are kind of individual contracts that do not have benefits associated with them.
Terrific, thanks. And then I guess my last comment, and I'll echo Nancy's thought, if you and Bud and the team can prioritize the building evaluations. I have made a habit of asking, when we're talking about big ticket items, of asking the question, what else?
Mm-hmm.
What else and what's next? And I think that's a fair question to ask, so I appreciate your efforts there as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Bud, if I could just add on exactly what Bob touched on. So we had reached out to a couple of larger architectural/engineering companies just to try to get get some feedback on what it might cost to do that review. And you're actually going to hear in the next presentation that we asked for to get a review of 2 much smaller buildings, and we were sort of taken aback at the price. So it'll be very interesting to see what number we get back. So as Dr. Maruschak said, the Habib and Associates is looking at it. I know Weston Sampson is looking at it. So we'll see what those numbers come back like. We did have our town accountant confirm with the Inspector General's office that we don't have to bid for that type of service, which can speed things up. But just hypothetically, because we spitballed roughly how much money could we come up with without having to go back to a town meeting combined, and we thought that magic number, I probably shouldn't say it because it might influence what people give us a quote back for, but it was something that you guys would probably say, hey, it's worth it that we do that. If it comes back twice that, I think collectively we're going to have to circle the wagons and find out. And I thought one of the better pieces of information we got today is how long would it take once we engage them to get a report back. And Dr. Maruschak has an excellent example of one that Mendon Upton had done within the last 12 months. And it's exactly what I know you all would say this is what we were looking for.
Very simple,
Yeah.
prioritizing things by priority 1, priority 2, priority 3 with a timeline.
Photos,
Yeah.
big picture stuff. And the answer was it would take roughly, about 6 months to get that report back. Then we'd have a lot of soul searching. How do we fund the stuff in the report? But that's roughly what we're looking at. And I got the sense we could have a rough idea on the cost within the next month or two. Roughly.
Correct. Yeah.
So, and not to beat a dead horse, but in a weird way, the town is in a little bit better position. A, our buildings are much smaller, but B, we have a handful that are much newer, and obviously because they're newer, they're in better shape. But we would still like to have some sort of report to try to indicate, okay, over the next 20 years, this is what you should focus on, or even the next 10 years would be helpful. So,
Crystal?
Yeah, that was kind of my question. How far, when there's an assessment, how far out do they go? And I know it probably varies on each building, each department, but is it generally 10 to 20 years that they look at this? And with cost of inflation, that's kind of...
yeah, I think from other reports we've seen, that's about the timeline, 10 to 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah, the priority 1 would be, this is critical, this needs to be addressed within the next year. And then, priority 2 might be more in that 2 to 5 year range and so on.
And do they factor in inflation?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Anything else for Dr. Maruschak? Seeing none. Thank you again,
you.
and we look forward to continue. Oh, Kevin Sorrell.
Kevin Strahl, Chair of the School Committee. Mr. Guerin, I am lockstep with you. We've been talking about this, the longer term for the facilities at the school committee level. It is certainly one of our key priorities. I don't know what the bid's going to come back. If Joe and Bud can't find it, you will see it as a line item in our next year's budget to fund it, because we think it's that important.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Dr. Marshak.
Thank you.
Let's move on. A significant amount of effort and time by town administrators, staff, experts, consultants, and members of the Board of Selectmen and our Finance Committee have been putting into developing plans for what's next in the aged DPW and downtown fire station. The Finance Committee has received ongoing updates on their work and recommendations as part of planning for the future. We're continuing this discussion tonight, and we'll try to respond to the request of the Board of Selectmen to provide feedback in key areas that they've outlined that were included in our agenda package. I'd ask our committee members to make notes on those points for discussion afterwards, and likewise just to hold questions for the presenters until they've made their way through the full presentation. Bud.
I just ask Bill and Jeff, are you guys still on? Because when we have the presentation up, we can't see you.
Yes, I'm
All
on.
right, perfect. Thank you.
Oh, here.
And I think Heather's going to do a quick intro. I'm going to add a few things, and then we'll get going.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having us. I've been the convener of the committee, so I get the honors of doing the introduction for all of you. And I just will start off by saying that we know what a difficult decision-making process this will be. We recognize it will be an incredibly heavy lift, both for ourselves if we decide to take something on, and will be a really difficult decision for the taxpayers at the ballot. So we all take this very seriously. We understand the weight of the decision, but we felt really strongly that we wanted to bring to you this evening, with the guidance of the Select Board, the very same presentation that we gave to the Select Board. So you get the sense from all of us that what we're recommending in the presentation that we have this evening is a program that has been rigorously evaluated 2 to 3 times by our consultants and our team, and represents what we believe is the best program to meet the long-range needs of the community. They may not meet what we think the financial capacity or appetite is, but it's what we're recommending to meet the needs of the community. So with that, I'll just start out with a quick intro. It's slightly better than the presentation that we gave to the selectmen for 2 reasons. One, there are 4 additional slides that reflect some of the questions that we'll get to. And we have seats for all of our team. So that's a big plus. And I just want to do a quick introductions of who's here with me. Of course, Town Manager Chief Burke, Paul Tilton, Director of Public Works, Mike Richard from West End Sampson, and Taylor McDonald from Pomeroy Associates. We've been working with them for over a year. They're a really talented group of individuals, and I think that will be clear as we make our way through the presentation. So first, a little bit of background. This has been in our long-range plan, and just to distinguish the long-range plan from our capital plan, the long-range plan is a plan we work with the Select Board on every year and work with all of our department heads. We, in fact, have circulated it for updates for this coming fiscal year at one of our last department head meetings. We really are sort of continuously reflecting on what that long-range plan is. It's included every year and presented to town meeting and adopted by town meeting. This project has been in that long-range plan for 7 years. It was most recently approved at the town meeting in May, and it is the last major municipal building project. We know there'll be many more as we look at school needs, but this is the last major project of municipal needs. The working group started in 2024. I won't read everyone's names, but almost everybody is here. Maybe raise your hand if you're on the committee. Charlie, Patrick, the team. We've got a great group all here. Crystal, yes. Matt, there, everyone's here. I did introduce everybody, but that's great. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. So the shared use site project has been funded multiple times at town meeting. You see part of our consultant team here with Mike and Taylor. We also have Kristen Kowalik-Grillo, who is Christine, who is the architect with Weston Sampson, very knowledgeable, spent her career working essentially on public works facilities and knows that business backwards and forwards. We also have Todd Costa from KBA Associates, and they have worked with the town on other previous projects, but really have a great talent and experience with fire facilities. So they've teamed up and have been working together on the project. In terms of the investment that's already been made, back in 2020, the Director of Public Works requested some funds to take a look at the reuse of the facility. And if you recall, that report came back and said it really wasn't worth reusing the existing infrastructure, and that was really based on what the needs of a modern public works facility are. And as a result of that, we came back and asked you and the town for additional funding for a full assessment of a shared use project, which is funded in 2024. In addition to that, we funded a fire consulting response study, and in this last year, we've done some additional services to take a close look at the geotechnical evaluation, which helped us get better numbers on what the site costs might be, and that was incredibly helpful, and Mike will talk about that a little bit later. And then an existing conditions assessment, very high level, so that we had an idea of what the conditions of the current buildings are, and what the needs are just fundamentally to bring those buildings up to code, and you'll get a little bit more information on that in the presentation. Background is that again, we talked about this, that the assessment, and original assessment didn't support reuse, and found that significant upgrades were necessary for both buildings. So I'm going to just let Bud talk a little bit. We've talked with the select board numerous times about what they're hoping to hear from you this evening, really to get your feedback to the select board. And Bud can talk a little bit.
Sure. Can I introduce one more person? Michael McCune from KBA Associates is here. So we all owe Michael a debt of gratitude. He was part of the group 15 plus years ago that studied, do we need the wing school? Can we get rid of it in terms of school usage, and what can we do with it afterwards? So I know this can all be overwhelming, but if you think what Michael tackled 15 years ago and where things have changed by not having students there, by reusing it for senior affordable housing, like that's something we should remember. And last thing I just wanted to say really quickly as part of the introduction, when we made the presentation to the select board, we first wanted to ask them, okay, do you feel comfortable enough with this that you even want us to make a presentation to the finance committee? And then if so, what sort of input would you like to get back from them? So the board unanimously voted yes, please make the exact same presentation to the committee, which is what we're going to do right now, with the added slides that Heather referenced, and especially for Jeff's sake and Bill's sake, when we get to that part of the presentation, we'll explain when we've switched to the new slides, because they have two separate documents on that, not just a collated one. And then what I tried to do with the board over the succeeding 2 weeks is 2 meetings, was just to try to summarize what to get feedback on. And so that's in your packet. And not to belabor things, but there is a 1-page summary that just talks about, I'm using as an example, you're going to hear that there's probably 5 to 10 slides from each from fire and from DPW, sort of explaining existing conditions and why we need to improve them. Just a personal point of view, I think the next time we make the presentation, that can be winnowed down to maybe 2 slides each, just things like that. But we'd like to get your feedback on, and obviously the biggest concern that we all have is the cost, which we're all going to talk about. So with that, and I would also stress, because I don't think the select board is looking for immediate answers for their next meeting, if the committee needs time to think about what our presentation is and what your feedback would be, there's time to try to get that input back. So at this point, I think we'll turn it over to Chief Burke, and he'll start with the fire.
That's better. Put that one aside. All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for your time for the presentation. I'm going to run through about, like Bud said, about 7 or 8 slides talking about the current status of the station and what we're looking for with the potential new station. So where we're at as of today, we have 3 stations, 115 Route 6A, 466 Route 6A, and the new headquarters at 251 Cotuit Road. That shows you the staffing. Just as an aside, and Bud and I have talked about this for years, we are good with our staffing model. We're very satisfied with our staffing model. We're not looking for any more people. So we think we have the sweet spot in terms of the number of people on the department that are on duty. And at the headquarters station, besides the 1 captain, 3 firefighters, we have the administrative staff, myself, the deputy administrative assistant, fire prevention, and EMS. So current Station 1 needs, obviously safety and code issues, higher and deeper garage bays. I'm going to give you some examples of photos, but President Eisenhower was in office when the station was built in 1952. 1952 apparatus were not as big as they are today. So that's one of the main reasons trying to squeeze trucks with an inch or 2 of clearance into the building. We cannot fit our ladder truck in there, and it belongs downtown for our insurance service organization rating. So I'll talk about that. Obviously the flood zone is obvious as to where it's at. Air quality and gender diverse sleeping in locker room areas, we made some strides with that back in 2016. We did a couple of tweaks to that, but in terms of long range, we're looking at more gender diverse sleeping locker room areas and improved air quality in the building. A couple of old photos. The first one on the left, right around 1952. The actual second edition is not even on the station. You can see the height of the truck. The second photo is on the B side of the building, closer to the marsh. Again, the size of the apparatus is pretty obvious back in the 50s. A little more 1987 photo to the left, Rescue 3, which was a mini pumper. That fit. And I put the photo on the right. If you are not from town, the Daniel Webster was actually the original fire station before 1952. And that is the town's first ambulance, and you can see the size of that. So the shared use site, so operational improvements. The good news is we've done this once or twice. The new station on Cotuit Road, we learned an awful lot as to what works and what doesn't. What we're looking for with this shared use site is space to fit both the ladder truck and our fleet maintenance. Again, the ladder truck being downtown maximizes our ISO credit rating for fire protection. We want to retain the 5-mile radius for coverage for residential homes. I will quickly mention to you, we ran into a situation with Phillips Road over the bridge that the Board of Selectmen had to address. The insurance service organization will not insure a home if it's more than 5 miles from a fire station. Dealing with ISO, we told them the Sagamore station in Bourne, which is 2 miles from Phillips Road, is our automatic response. The ISO does not recognize automatic mutual aid, so we had to actually do an intermunicipal agreement with the town of Bourne that their station will respond to retain that 5-mile radius. So again, if you're outside of a 5-mile radius, the insurance service organization and your insurance company can rate it a 10, 1 being the best. We're currently a 3. They can rate your property a 10 if you're outside of that radius. We want to make sure we keep that 5-mile radius for coverage. The cut-through road behind the station, so those that lived in town many years, that I called the dump road growing up, but there was a road that comes behind the DPW from Charles Street. We would like to resurrect that as part of it with gates on either end. That would improve response back into that Galloping Hills neighborhood. Also, other apparatus responding from other parts of town, specifically the Cotuit Road Station, could come down 130 and cut behind the station and get into that neighborhood. So there's some definite benefits there to resurrecting that road as part of the project. Air quality control systems and positive pressure gear storage areas. Firefighter cancer rates, as we know, are significant. A lot of it is due to the equipment and the personal protective equipment. We are making a transition to PFAS-free fire gear. We've already started that. But the recommendation is these gear storage areas are in positive pressure, removed from the rest of the building and stored appropriately. So those are some of the improvements that we would see with the shared use site. Hopefully you can follow this, but if you look at the arrows, the site location is pretty much dead center in the slide. And you can see our flexibility to be able to utilize Charles Street and Chipman Road as needed for additional responses. We all know traffic is an issue. I thought this past Sunday, 4th of July weekend, was especially bad. I live in Lakewood Hills, and there were cars backed up in front of my house, and I live in a residential neighborhood. So in terms of traffic and getting around, having the ability of the cut-through road, if you are coming north on 130, provides significant ability to respond into that neighborhood. The other thing is the proximity to the highway. So you always try to site fire stations in major thoroughfares, hence Cotuit Road and Quaker, great spot, right? We can get north, south, east, west. The current station is just basically an east-west on 6A. This proposed new location would give us the ability to get on the highway, go east-west, and also go north-south on 130. It does make a difference if you are in the east part of town. So if you are down on the Chase Road area and the East Sandwich Station is not available, your second response is coming from the current 115 Route 6A. If the new location is adopted, you're going to see improved response time. You're going to be able to get up on the highway and get down to exit 4 and get into those neighborhoods. So the location itself also lends to response over the bridge to Phillips Road to those residents there. So again, the siting of the location provides, I think, maximum flexibility when we look at our response capability. So questions that people ask me all the time is, we get a hurricane next week and it wipes out the station. What's your plan? So we have worked with the Water District for at least 12 years, but over the last 5 years, we relocate our apparatus to their current new storage building as part of our relocation plan, and we do it once a year. We actually run calls out of that building. And it gives us an idea of kind of response time. It's out of the floodplain. And if we had to pivot quickly and retain coverage in the downtown district, we're able to do this fairly quickly. And the fact that we practice it, we know everything fits. You would have to add a living trailer if there was a long-term displacement from the current station. But the fact of the matter is we have a plan if something were to occur, and we practice it. So I think there's value there because, again, if something happens to the station, we do not want to abandon the downtown area for all the reasons I just went over. We have a quick pivot that we can do, working graciously with the Water District to be able to support those needs. This gives you kind of an idea. This is at the Water District. You can see the ladder truck fits, the ambulances, the personnel fit, so it's a fairly quick transition. Going back to recruitment and retention, this is a picture of the dormitory room at Cotuit Road. It looks like a college dorm. It is set up just as such, a desk, 2 beds, and lockers. But it also allows for individual sleeping quarters, again, male, female. The current station, it's just a big open area with some lockers separating the beds. This allows for each person to have their own individual sleeping area with the ability to flex for storm coverage. We can put a second person in there. Our proposal is for 8 bunk rooms at this new location to flex to 16. So we'd only put 8 beds in. We'd have blow-up mattresses if we needed for the second beds. But it provides 2 things, that expansion if we need to, but also hiring people, and I think I've mentioned this to this committee many years, our living requirements is now 60 miles. That's pretty significant. That's Providence, Boston, all of the South Shore. Housing's an issue. So we've allowed our personnel to potentially live farther away to be able to get that first home. But we work a 24-hour schedule. We're the only town department that works 24 hours in terms of consistent shift work. So you work a 24-hour shift, you have 24 off. In the middle, you do another 24, and then you have 5 days off. This would allow the ability of somebody that lived off Cape, a couple of the extra rooms could be used in that middle day. If they did not want to go home, they could stay for that extra 24-hour period, obviously not get paid, but they would have the ability to stay on this side of the bridge, sleep there, do whatever they need to do during the day. It also allows for Paul's folks with the DPW during storms when the plow operators should not be sleeping in the front of their truck. We would have the ability to allow DPW workers to sleep there also. And again, it's a very simple setup. I know 8 bunk rooms seems like a lot. It really isn't in terms of size. It's one hallway with basically 8 bedrooms that can flex to, like I said, 16. So that was one of the things I felt was very important with the new station. So that's my rundown. I'm going to turn it over to Paul. Paul, you ready?
Thank you. And again, Paul Tilton, DPW Director. And thank you for the opportunity to present the second portion of our shared use site, which is the Public Works facility. And I think some of you have toured our facility, sort of speaks for itself, and you can see the constraints and deficiencies that we have. If you look at this area right here, it's pretty self-evident that we're in a real tight campus area, a lot going on there, a lot of equipment, a lot of buildings, and just very difficult to work within that facility given the size of that site. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about sort of the then, when it was built back in 1972, the now, and also I'll get a little bit into what we hope to be in the future with a new facility. So as I mentioned, the facility was built back in 1972, so it's 53 years old. Any building that gets to be 3 years old is going to experience some growing issues, and obviously some, over time you're going to experience some failing of the structure itself, including the utilities, and just the general condition of the building is not satisfactory right now. So basically, it no longer meets modern day public works operational demands. And the population going back to 1972 was about 5,000. That grew up to 20,000 people. So obviously the service demands have increased over the years. The infrastructure has expanding, including the roads and the drainage, and our maintenance has increased as well. Our staffing has also increased over that time, and quite frankly, we don't have additional space for our work areas. We don't have meeting spaces as well to accommodate that within our existing facility. We also have more vehicles necessitating the need to store them outside. We probably have about 12 to 14 inside and about 9 to 10 outside. We really want to get all our vehicles inside. We also have some major equipment and technology upgrades that have occurred over the years. Unfortunately, we can't accommodate those. We can't implement that into the facility because it just is too old. We also have some aging utilities, and those require frequent repairs. We also have some code compliance challenges with this facility. And collectively, all these issues really make it difficult for us to hire staff, to get good candidates to not only work here, but to retain that staff as well. And we also looked at what the inefficiencies result in terms of lost time. So we did a quick calculation based upon some of the constraints that we're up against. And anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour per day per worker is lost because of some of these deficiencies that we have. That equates to about 1 to 2 laborers per day, or 80,000 to 160,000 per year. It might not seem like much, but when we only have about 15 laborers, that's really a big hit, and we can certainly use those additional laborers that we lose due to the deficiencies. The next slide, shows one of the biggest issues that we have here is the inadequate storage space that we have at our facility. On the left is our facility. We call it sort of the jigsaw puzzle. We fit in as many vehicles as we can. Again, we have to store a lot outside, and it's really a challenge to mobilize each and every day, not only leaving the site but also coming back at the end of the day. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving vehicles, a lot of people in here. At the end of the day, when we have to back up vehicles, there's people in there, and that's just a recipe for something bad to happen because of all those movements. It's also difficult to access some of our equipment, which is stored behind the trucks. You can't really see there. but quite often we have to move the trucks to get to our other equipment. Over on the right shows an example of a recently constructed DPW storage garage. Obviously plenty of space. There's area to store the plows there. We currently store our plows outside. A one-way in, one-way out configuration, which makes it a lot easier to get in and out of the site and a lot safer as well. So a modern facility will provide ample, well-organized indoor storage for our entire fleet, which is worth about $8 million. Some of the dump trucks you see there are about $350,000 right now, so we really want to protect that investment. Also, an efficient layout enables faster deployment and safer maneuvering of our vehicles. This slide shows our maintenance and repair areas. What you see here is a portable lift. You probably remember that from a capital request a couple of years ago. A real tremendous purchase, and appreciate your support. But it still does have its limitations. We have a real good mechanic on board, but he has to move a lot of vehicles and equipment to actually set this system up. And sometimes we get a lot of water from the rain from the trucks and the snow from the trucks, and also the water comes underneath the bay. So it's difficult to work within this area because of those constraints. Over on the right is an example of a recently constructed DPW maintenance area. As you can see, much more room to work on the trucks. Easy access to the hoses for all of the fluids for the mechanic. And there's just really plenty of space to leave the trucks that are currently under repair. So dedicated maintenance bays equipped with the latest technology and tools will allow quicker servicing and repairs, minimizing downtime for vehicles and equipment, which is critical in our construction field. This slide shows to the left, our material storage area. Gives a comparison of what we have and where we want to be. And unfortunately, we don't have adequate space. We make the best of what we have out here at our site. And every day, if we have a project out on the road that we have to go to, we have to load up down at an aggregate site such as PA Landers. We don't have enough space to store those materials. So occasionally there can be lines when we're waiting for the aggregates, and it's just a loss of productivity and a lot of lost time when that happens. So over on the right shows an adequate material storage area, plenty of room to store your materials, also easy to access as well. And at the end of the day, if we have leftover, it's easy to dump those materials there. So a larger organized storage area for materials such as aggregate and drainage structures will streamline daily operations and improve supply management of these materials. This slide shows material storage and access areas. We recently had a safety audit done for our entire facility. This is one location they identified as needing upgrades. We had, I think, about 45 throughout the facility needing safety upgrades. This is one of the important ones. There's a lot going on here. We have our fluids here. We have flammable liquids here. We have the tires in the back. We also have a loader adjacent to that, which has to back up in this area. So really tight fit in a dangerous area. Over on the right shows an example of a DPW fluid containment area, which is what we should have. Much safer, easier to access these fluids as well. So an improved chemical storage area will ensure compliance with safety standards and reduce employee risk and potential fines. This next slide shows one of our employee spaces. And this is our lunchroom / meeting room on the left. As you can see, it's kind of a tight squeeze here. We do have a lot of meetings and trainings in here. I'm a strong advocate of training. I train myself. My managers train. We have consultants come in and train. Also, when we have short meetings, anywhere from 15 to half an hour, we can do it in this room with some folks standing. If we have any meetings over an hour, up to 2 hours, then we have to go off-site at the CAL or in this building or somewhere else to accommodate our staff. So very inconvenient to do that. and quite frankly, a waste of time to have to get in our trucks and go elsewhere for our training. Over on the right is an example of a DPW facility that can be a lunchroom and also a meeting room. This would be able to handle the staff that we have. An on-site meeting room large enough for full staff will facilitate better communications in public works training. And a meeting room with enhanced technology will improve emergency coordination and storm response. Next slide shows some employee spaces. This one is of our de facto locker room area. And as you can see, we share it with the trucks. It's in the garage. We've got tools and equipment next to it as well. If the staff needs to change, sometimes they're out in the rain and they're sweaty and dirty. They like to come back in and change sometimes. Really no room to do that. They have to do it here. Sometimes they go in the bathroom, which can only hold about two people. And sometimes they go into some of the offices as well to change. So not a real convenient situation in terms of our employees being able to change and clean up. Over on the right, an example of a DPW new facility with a locker room that has adequately sized locker rooms with toilets as well. So in general, modern offices, locker rooms, rest areas, bunks for storms, as Chief mentioned, and an upgrade HVAC system will improve staff comfort and morale, supporting productivity. This next slide shows the energy efficient building compliant and modern codes. The two on the left, that's our electrical panel. On the right is our heating and ventilation system. Very old units. It's a very inefficient building that doesn't meet code today. Our facilities department spends a lot of time making repairs through our utilities. It's really a drain on their staff, their time and their money as well. And we lose power quite frequently within the building, whether it be a storm or not. We do lose power out front in the office every so often. Over on the right is an example of an energy efficient system at a DPW. That's the kind of system that we would obviously get with a new building. So a new building will reduce energy costs and downtime caused by frequent repairs of an aging system, allowing the facilities department to focus on their core operations. The last slide is sort of a summary of what we're looking to do and what some of the benefits are. A new building with optimized storage, upgraded maintenance bays, and a streamlined layout will reduce downtime, improve safety, and speed up completion of our projects. A new building will also, that is an energy efficient design, and protected indoor spaces will cut utility and maintenance costs. A new building with modern offices, rest areas, and locker rooms will boost employee morale, teamwork, and emergency readiness, which is essential for the major storms that we have to tackle today. And a new facility will meet safety codes and environmental standards, reducing risk while attracting and retaining skilled staff at the DPW. And just sort of to wrap up, I think our department is very efficient right now, given the constraints and some of the limitations that we face with every day. I do know that given this additional space, the tools and the resources that a new facility has to offer, we can certainly provide better and more efficient service to the public. Understanding there is a cost associated with that, but I really think the public deserves the best that we have to offer, and we can certainly do that with a new facility. So, thank you, and turn it over to Mike.
Thank you. Once again, my name is Mike Richard. I'm from Weston and Sampson. You just heard from Chief Burke and Director Tilton about some of the challenges that they have with their current facility and how it's impacting their operations in terms of efficiency, health and safety, employee recruitment, retention, morale, etc. So I'm going to talk looking forward in terms of what is the programming for the new facility, or what is required for the new facilities, and then I'll talk about costs as well. So whenever we take on a project like this, we first want to understand the operations. We want to understand the cost of the building size drivers. Those drivers are typically the vehicles and equipment, the staffing, the divisions, and other important key factors such as adjacencies and what works well, what doesn't work well, et cetera. So we went through this. It was a very iterative process. We do a first take on it, and then we go back and we review it, and we make several adjustments. Ultimately, what we came up with after reviewing it with the Department of Public Works was a program size of about 38,000 square feet with an additional canopy storage of about 3,000 square feet. We did a similar program analysis for the fire department, and what we came up with was a program size of about 18,000 square feet. Of course, I'm rounding those numbers, as you can see. Once we have the program, what we can do is we can work into site concepts. So we went through several iterations of site concepts, or many iterations of site concepts with the committee, 15 to 20, and then some variations thereof. Anybody that's familiar with that site knows that it's challenging. There's several access points going into the site. There's other uses on the site. And there's a hill that slopes from the south to north of the bottom of the page as you look at it to the top of the page. So what we want to come up with is an optimal layout for both the operations and also for cost impact. Ultimately, we got down to a couple different iterations, and we sat down with the operators of the facility again, and we came up with this concept here. What was driving this concept to rise to the top was a couple things. Number one, we placed the fire department on the knoll. That's the area where the Public Works operates now. That was determined to be the best place for the fire department. This gives them the best access to Charles Street. And this also was the best opportunity for phased construction. In other words, the DPW operations can continue to operate at their current site while the new facility is being constructed. Then Public Works, once the new facility is constructed, can move into their new facility, and the fire department building can then be constructed. Another aspect here is that the fire department did not like the idea of being lower than the road for safety reasons. And then both operations did not want to mix the Public Works operations with the fire operations. And when I say that, what I mean is we looked at some ancillary operations in terms of the fueling, the bulk storage that Paul was just talking about, salt, et cetera. Could that be located up on the knoll? We did evaluate that, but nobody felt that that was in the best needs for the operations. Now, zooming in on the fire department, we talked about that this is the best place and it allows for phased construction. And what this is an estimated cost savings of up to about $480,000 if we can avoid temporary ops for the Public Works. Looking at the Public Works layout, there's a couple key features here. Number one, there's two existing curb cuts now into the chamber, and that's going to become one shared access with the Public Works. This is, mainly driven by the number of access points currently going into the site. What we expect that we'll hear from Mass DOT, and it's definitely, from an engineering perspective, it's definitely a safer access. Also, what we'd have is an aligned intersection, which will give us some traffic control. So as you enter the site, you can take a left to go to the chamber, you can take a right to go to DPW, or the operators of the facility can drive into the secured yard area by driving straight ahead. Also with this layout, we have street-facing offices and administrative space. This is the lower volume space, and this gives the town the best opportunity to create a more aesthetically pleasing look off of the street. You have more opportunity for windows and smaller doors versus the more industrial setting that will be placed to the rear of the parcel with the larger overhead doors, the fueling, the canopy, et cetera. And at that rear of that site, you'd also have secured area for the yard operations. So not accessible to the public. With this, to minimize the grading on the site, what we have is we have an upper level where the fire department would be located, a mid-level where the public works, administrative and employee spaces would be, and the lower level for the garage, maintenance area, shop area, and yard operations as well. And from there, what we've done after developing the concept, we moved into the schematic design process. And the schematic design is really the first step of the design process, if you will. This is where we focus on clarifying some of the demands of the project. While not all the pieces will be placed on a plan, a lot of the key aspects might be written in narrative form. And what the nice thing about the schematic design is that it gets us a more accurate cost estimate that we'll talk about in coming up. So what I want to show you here is this is historic pricing of municipal facilities that were bid between the years of 2014 and 2024. This trend, this trend is pretty consistent no matter what type of building you're talking about. If you're talking public works facilities, it's this trend line. If you're talking fire department, it's the same trend line. It just might be higher up on this graph. So the trend line is exactly the same. And what we do when we look at this is we look at, projecting out, we look at what the historic inflation has been, or escalation has been. In this case, we're carrying 8% from the year 2023, and that's shown by the orange dash line there, projecting out to 2027. Likewise, we look at what could be a favorable bidding scenario, and we look at 5% escalation, and we're carrying that out from 2022. And you can see that's the green line there that's shown in the dashes. And the way we priced out this schematic design set is we used an independent estimator. So we gave the schematic design to an independent estimator, somebody that's not affiliated with our organization, and they priced it out. And the price came out right where we would expect it, right in between the two projection lines. So that was pretty positive news. What I'd also like to point out is that this trend line that we're looking at is based on actual bid prices that we received on similar type projects. Also, I want to call your attention to 2017, the year 2017, where the fire department headquarters was constructed. If you look at what that price was back then compared to where we are now, pricing has increased almost threefold, between 2.5 and threefold. So, expecting prices from 2017 is not realistic. So the independent estimator broke out the construction cost as follows. You can see he breaks it out to site work, the fuel island, the open canopy, salt shed, fire substation, DPW, and this is all escalated to the first quarter of 2026, with a total construction cost of 45.9, we'll call it 46 million. And this is what we'd expect the general contractor's bid price to come in at. In addition to that, the town also is going to need to allocate additional funds for what we call owner's soft costs. Owner's soft costs are the A&E fees, the OPM fees, furnishing equipment, construction contingencies, et cetera. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that entails in the coming slides. And that brings us a total project cost of about $58.2 million. Recognizing this price, we were asked to go back to the drawing board and take a look at a couple things. Renovations of the existing spaces. So we went back and we did a walkthrough on these spaces. And, first and foremost, I want to point out that the existing facility does not meet the current needs of the operations in today's modern operations. The spaces both are severely undersized. And the building has exceeded its useful life, requiring significant upgrades. But the other thing that is important here is, as Chief Burke talked about, is we have a FEMA flood elevation that is more than 3 feet above where the finished floor elevation is now. But designing to a new facility to meet code, is not 3 feet. You got to go an additional 2 feet. So we're looking at over 5 feet that we need to address in terms of the flood elevation. Other things that we identified is that reuse of the structure is going to require complete replacement of most aspects of the building in their entirety. And really what's really salvageable is the main framing, portions of the foundation. But additional upgrades on those aspects are going to be needed to bring the facility up to code and to make it a functional facility. Similar with the public works operations, we've already talked about how undersized this facility is. And you can see from this photo how they're using every square inch of this site and every square inch inside the building as well. So the building is woefully undersized. And again, it's also exceeded its useful life. It's a pre-engineered metal building. We have seen a lot of these in public works operations, so we're quite familiar with these. Really what we'd end up with is just stripping this down completely down to just the main framing. And that main framing is going to have to be reinforced with stiffeners, additional framing as well, and then the foundations are going to have to be reinforced as well. So there's really not much salvageable in this type of building. And so we, again, fed this information to our independent estimator, and what they came back with is estimated for renovations of the DPW building is on the order of magnitude of $4.5 million, and the fire department is $10.2 million. And that's essentially the same cost as constructing new. And on top of that, you have additional soft costs that also have to be carried through as well, for a total of about $7.6 million and $17.3 million. But again, I just want to reiterate, that is for the building, rebuilding it in kind or renovating it in kind. It really doesn't address some of the shortcomings of the facility and the square footage requirements. So coming back to this, this cost estimate, a couple numbers that stood out.
Mike, can I just interrupt and just explain? This is where the new slides go in. So the 4 or 5 new slides are the ones right here. So for Bill and Jeff's sake, this is from that other packet.
Thank you. So a couple numbers that stood out to people is the site work and the soft costs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what those costs entail to paint a better picture. The site work it includes some general cost information. About 68% of the costs that you see there in that number is really, no matter what site you go into, you're going to capture those same costs. Those costs are listed there on the left. I'm not going to read through those, but everything from demolition to cuts and fills on site, some grading, the utilities coming to the site, excavation and backfill, structural excavation and backfill, etc. The site-specific costs that pertain to this particular site includes the retaining walls, some import of fill, the access road that goes out to Charles Street as well. And that makes up about 32% of the cost, or about little over $2 million. So the soft cost that we had portrayed in the previous slide was $12.3 million. A couple items to point out here is the A&E Special Services that was asked about. This is just an allowance that we carry. When we look at this, the A&E fee that we're carrying now is, again, that's an allowance. And generally the rule of thumb is anywhere from 8 to 15%, depending on the complexity and the size of the project. So we carry just a straight out contingency, and then we start looking at what is specific to this project. So a couple things that are specific to this project might include the geotech services for unsuitable soils that were identified through our geotech investigation. So if it's just simply removal and replacement, it might require some additional oversight. But if we get into specialty helical piles or ground improvements, there's going to be some design fees that will be required. We're also just including in that allowance some things that might come up in terms of additional permitting or design requirements for the adjacent landfill. Right now, we don't think that there's anything that's required, but there might be something in terms of subsurface gas system, collection system, monitoring system, et cetera. And also, Mass DOT has not been willing to talk to us to this point, so we don't know what they're going to require. Historically, we see them asking for a lot of additional drainage information, curb cuts, lighting, things like that. So we just want to be sure that we get everything covered right now, on the table right now, and then hopefully we can scale back this number. The other thing that was pointed out is the FF&E communications and low voltage system at a cost of $2.6 million. That includes everything listed here. I'm not going to read through it all, but it's your audio visual equipment. It's your FF&E. There's some specific requirements for the fire department. Equipment and alerting system. There's network and computers, communications, security, an emergency access, communications tower, and then there's also a contingency upon that, just to make sure we caught it all. The committee also asked us to look at 2 additional sites, recognizing that there were some site-specific costs, wondering if there's something else that we can do. And we looked at 2 sites, both located on Quaker Meeting House Road. Both these sites did involve some additional site-specific site work to the point of $1.2 million. But it was also pointed out to us, if we were to relocate the Public Works facility, we need to provide some additional support space for the landfill and transfer station attendants as well. And we've estimated that the cost of that structure to be on the order of magnitude of $1 to $1.4 million. So when you think about going to another site, particularly one of these 2 sites, what you'll find is the cost savings is relatively minimal. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bud.
Yeah, I'll just try to go through this quickly. Not going to go through this slide line by line, but just there's a lot of benefits to the shared site in terms of the departments working together. But also, I think it's really important to point out, because when you look at those pictures, you're like, well, how come the building's not in better shape? And I can't stress enough, like, how much maintenance is done all the time on both buildings. If anyone went to that Touch a Truck event that DPW had about a month and a half, 2 months ago, I mean, the place is spotless as we can keep it, recognizing that we're dealing with like an antiquated shoebox that's smaller than our shoe can fit in. So we're doing the best. And again, all these have been touched on previously, so I don't want to just nitpick through these slides. So go to the next one. Just a couple of ideas or explanations on what's required if a project this size goes forward. So we've spent, roughly $400,000 so far from appropriations at town meeting and from operating budgets to help pay for some professional services to try to get us to where we are today. Really, to take it to another level, we would need additional funding. We have tried to set aside a little bit of money, assuming that the Select Board and Finance Committee may have some questions that we haven't thought about yet. So if we have to do some minimal reconnaissance, go back and come up with some of those answers on any questions we might receive. We have a little bit of money to cover that, but not extensive. So what does it require for a project of this size? Really, the only way you can fund something this large is through debt exclusion. That's why the state, when Proposition 2.5 was enacted, it basically kept operating budgets under Proposition 2.5 and gave communities the ability to fund large-scale capital projects through a debt exclusion. So what does it take to get before the voters? It would actually take a 2/3 vote of the Select Board members, which where there's 5, it means 4 of the 5 would have to say we want it to go before the voters. It would require a 2/3 vote at town meeting because we have to get their permission to authorize and issue debt. And then finally, it would require a townwide ballot question at a town election, and that would be a simple majority. One of the things that I know we've highlighted the last 2 years in our annual budget presentations, we'll highlight next year and the year after, but then you'll actually see it. There's a couple big picture things that we're working on. One especially involves regional dispatch implementation, and I know we've shared that study with the committee years ago when it was first done, but it's projected that we'll save about $700,000 a year in our operating budget by going to a regional dispatch. And then for those who have been around for quite a while, when we initially bought the golf course, the hope was that golf proceeds would pay for the land acquisition, not the part we bought for open space, but the part for the actual golf operations. So many, many years ago, that was assumed by the town. So that falls off, I think, in FY31, and that's about $400,000. So potentially, like we see, freeing up of money within our Proposition 2.5 limit of roughly $700,000 for the dispatch and another $400,000 for the golf course debt, and those should happen within 2 years of each other, based on everything we've heard about when regional dispatch can be fully implemented. I know that's something the committee's very interested in, and Chief and I can give you an update at a future meeting on that. And I want to stress this is something that Bill always says to us. You know, the $58.2 million number is our best estimate right now based on our plans that we have, which admittedly are schematic designs. If we get funding to go to the next level, more detailed plans would be developed. There'd be much closer cost estimates we'd be able to present and come up with an actual amount. If there's a change in the economy where bids are coming in a little bit better, that would be able to be reflected. But really, until we actually bid the project, the private sector bids on the construction documents that we would issue, we wouldn't know that final cost. Until we've actually bonded and we have the final interest rates, we know what our true costs are, and then we could, say exactly what the impact would be year to year. But I want to stress, until that's done, we don't know. But realistically, we all want to give our best estimate. So the next page shows a little bit of those estimates. I'm going to not read everything on here, and I'll try to go through the high level. I'll get to the chart on the right in a second. But just to refresh everyone's memory, on the fiscal year that we just completed, the average tax bill was just under $7,600. The average home value was just over $700,000, and the town's total valuation was just under $7.5 billion. And so all these numbers are based on those numbers because that's how you can equate it back to a dollar amount. As I just said, and I know Bill would especially want me to say this again, debt exclusion actual costs are not known until the debt's sold and the actual costs are known. So when we did all these projections, we consistently based it on two things. One, a 30-year bond, because this is such a large project, such a large number, the most you can go out is 30 years. So this is reflective of 30-year bonds borrowed at 4%. Now, many of you will remember when we borrowed the money for the marina office and garage, we got under 2%. Times have changed. We feel confident with the 4% number. And just to give you an idea, a change in the interest rate, even by 1%, could have a significant impact on those estimates. So I'll just touch on what those impacts might be hypothetically if we could borrow at 3% instead of 4%. But for all these estimates, we borrowed at 4%. So again, the total that was estimated was $58.2 million. So we ran the numbers for two amounts, one for $55 million, one for $60 million, so we could show you the range. Probably most important, and I'll explain this a couple of times just so it sinks in. So if it says LP, that means level principal payments, meaning that you would pay the same amount of principal each year. So typically, if it was $60 million borrowed for 30 years, $2 million a year would be paid for principal, and then your interest amount would get added to that. As you could think it through, if you saw that on a graph, which is most of the time how we issue our debt, it starts out high in the beginning, and then over time, over the 30 years, it drops until it's fully paid off, and then it goes to zero. So that's something as a debt exclusion. I know it gets confusing for people who don't look at this all the time, but the bottom line is once the debt's fully paid off in any of these scenarios, the number goes to zero once it's paid. So level debt service is to try to estimate the 20 or 30 years of principal payment and debt based on the interest rates, and then you change the amount of principal that you're paying. So you try to pay the same amount over the course of the 30 years. So in that case, the graph would go straight across on the total amount you're paying, and then it would drop off. One of the things that we talk about a lot with municipal debt, we've been around, I think, incorporated since 1637. We don't plan to drive it into the ground since. One of the things that's different about a town than some businesses is, other needs will come up, other things will need to be funded. So that's one of the attractive things about when you start with level principal. It starts high and goes low, so as things drop off, over time, decades, you have to add more just to stay ahead of things, to keep things maintained properly or to address any new needs that may occur. The other part about level debt service, where it's straight, it's a little bit attractive because it costs people less in the beginning. And I guess the concept here is like, a loaf of bread in year 1 costs whatever, and then what would that cost in year 30, but your payments stay the same for that loaf of bread, in this case, the building. So that's what I just wanted to stress, the differences between level principal and level debt service. So again, I won't go through each number, but you'll see for the $55 million estimate in year 1 with level principal, it starts at about $388 per year for the average homeowner based on the numbers on the upper left. Drops each year, so by the time you get to year 30, it's under $200, and then it goes away in year 2031. For level debt service, again at $55 million, it would be roughly about $309 for all 30 years, and then it falls off. For $60 million, so again, for $5 million more in principal that we would have to borrow. And I want to stress, we don't borrow until we know what our true final cost is. So even if town meeting authorizes up to a certain amount, if the bids come in for less, we will bond for that lower amount. So with level principal, with the $60 million, it's about $425 a year in the first year for the average valued home. It drops to about $200 in year 30 and then falls to zero. For level debt service, again, it starts lower, but it stays the same throughout the course of the 30 years. It would be about $337. So just to show you, if that 4% was 3%, tonight, while I was sitting here, I ran the numbers for level principal. That $426 would drop by about $65 in the beginning, because if the interest rates were just 1% lower, I think the reason it's such a difference is you're borrowing so much money over so many years. Level debt service, which I can't do with a simple math, I need a spreadsheet back at the office. I think when Bill and I looked at that, the difference was about $85 if that came in at 3%. So just to give you an idea, we're just trying to show you based on the rough estimate for we have of the project, what the impact would be on the average home. So we're not trying to shy away from it. It's, that total cost is in some ways staggering when you think about what we built things for, roughly when we went out to bid in 2017, how much things have gone up, in barely a decade. But that's what's happened, in the course of public construction. So the next slide is just to say, the board, gave us a commitment to advance the project as far as making the same presentation with the finance committee. Would love to hear people's feedback. It's fair to say that I'm trying to paraphrase some of what we heard at the select board meeting, and I think I don't believe anyone disputed the need. I don't think anyone disputed really the location in the sense, especially for fire. It makes a world of sense, especially that access to the highway, as Chief Burke highlighted. I'm only quoting this because he's taught me well over time. Anytime a call comes in for EMS, emergency medical services, 40% of the time they're on a second call. So people say, why is it important to have access to that highway? Because 40% of the time when we get a call, the station that should be responding might not be able to respond. So he's having to bring people from another facility. And then most importantly, why did we cite the headquarters where we did? Because that's the geographic and population center of town. So if you think in a worst case scenario, if all 3 stations were empty and we had to call people back in on recall, we don't send them to the 2 corners of the town. We send people to the center because that gives us the best chance of being respond, not knowing where our next call will come from. And then just based on a couple things I heard, I just wanted to remind a couple things that the public told us way more than a decade ago. If people remember, the first proposal that we had for a new public safety headquarters, police and fire, the police and fire main headquarters would go exactly where they ended up going. And then we were going to try to get rid of our 2 East Sandwich and downtown substations and build a new substation on the high school property. We felt over time, even though the capital costs were greater, the personnel costs would more than pay for itself. I think our estimates were in less than 10 years, but the initial cost was higher. The public said, no, we don't want that. We want the service to our different parts of town. Don't forget that we hadn't yet got the federal grant to open East Sandwich. So that was instrumental. Shortly after the public said no, we got the federal grant to hire 8 people to staff East Sandwich. That was a grant that went 100% the first year, 75, 50, 25. So by the 4th year, we had to assume 100% of the costs. We were able budgetarily, all of us working together, to find a way to fund that the last year at 100% without requiring an override. That was huge. And I think every chief that we've had from our last 3 fire chiefs have all said, as JJ mentioned, our sweet spot is we need 10 people on staff to start a shift. And ever since we got that grant, it's allowed us to do that, and it's really made a big difference. I know the department's called fire. The vast majority of what we do is EMS. And I will say in my 30 whatever years of working with the town and working with all of us, I've never once got a single complaint about the medical services that our department provides. DPW, I don't think there's a department that this committee has looked at over the years that we needed to find a way to increase staffing. And when I say increase staffing by like 4, we worked forever for 4 people over probably a 10-year period, but we got there. We worked really hard last year. You guys all challenged me 3-4 years ago, how can we address that road bond, the road maintenance report that we get every year within 2.5 without requiring constant road bonds, without doing things. We found a way to do it. So I just want to stress that as overwhelming as this number seems, like we've all collectively worked really, really hard for a really long time to get to where we are. And I just feel operationally we are in such a good spot compared to where we were 5 years ago, and that's a testament to the support from the select board, from the finance committee, and from the public. This really is the last big municipal building project that we need, and I fully know what everyone's going to say. Yeah, we still need to look at major needs in the school, and we all know the biggest thing out there that we don't control is wastewater, and that is definitely coming, and we've gone through some pretty detailed numbers on what that will look like. But just trying to be honest and open. But we've come a long way. And personally, I feel like this would be a huge hump to get over. I realize it's going to be very difficult.
All right.
And
Thank you.
can I say one last thing?
Go ahead, Bud. Yes.
I got to stress, Charlie Holden and Patrick Ellis have been with this group since Paul was first holding meetings in that small meeting room, and Matt was there too. So they've literally been working on this for at least 4 years. Matt has donated a ton of his personal time coming to our meetings, spitballing. The reason I reached out for him to represent the committee was because of his construction background and his knowledge of the town from growing up here, and he's really added a lot. And then Crystal was able to join us within the last 6-8 months, and that's really helped to get more feedback from finance committee members. So regardless of what we hear when we open it up, I just want to thank the 4 board members and committee members for all the time that they've spent, because it's been a lot.
Thank you, and thank each of our guests that joined us this evening to provide us with information on the Share Use site. And I'd also like to just recognize and thank the Board of Selectmen for their encouragement for Bud and team to present to us this evening, and as well to your request for feedback from us. So I'd like to move some of our committee questions and discussion towards responding to the lists that the Board of Selectmen pulled together relative to key areas for feedback and just in general things that you may have questions on from tonight's presentation. So does anyone want to get us started? Kevin.
Well, first off, thank you very much. I don't think anyone who's ever been to the fire station or the DPW building would argue with the fact that they need to be replaced. You can't just upgrade them, they need to be replaced. Big thing is the cost and location. More I've looked at this, I like that location for the fire department. I really do like it. My concern, and I know the group has looked at many locations, and the site work over there, I just want to make sure that we're not putting too much on too difficult a site that is going to cause really concessions on both the fire and, more importantly, DPW. Is there a location, an alternate location for the DPW that gets them everything they need, whereas this site might just get them everything you can fit? Is there something, if 10 years down the road, I don't want them to say, boy, I wish I had another half an acre or another acre, or my trucks really need a little bit more space. Are we truly getting everything we need on this site? I love having them both together, just not convinced that you can get everything you want and need on that little site. And even with the fire department, is there a better layout if DPW wasn't there? Could it be slid a little bit further away from the transfer station access road? Are we going to have problems with cars lining up on Saturday that just get in the way of the fire department? And if the fire department was slid down a little bit because the DPW wasn't there, that wouldn't be as much of an issue. Another question I had was, you said if the DPW building was located elsewhere, you'd need $1 million or $1.4 million attendant building. And I understand why, because I mean, obviously they don't have anything and they're using the DPW building now. With the layout you have proposed, with a fire transfer station, then a fire department, then a DPW building, would they still need an attendant building, or would they be able to access the DPW from the transfer station, or is it too far away now? Just those little things. I know, and I'm sure most of these things you've looked at, and you're going to come back and say, no, that site is everything we need, and everything we're going to need for 10 years. I just don't want to be trying to put too much in too difficult a site.
Yeah, thank you. Very, very good questions. One thing I'd like to point out is, as we did go through that program and exercise, you brought up the point about DPW expansion. We do have space allocated for future operations as well, so we are anticipating that. And there is additional, I don't want to say reserve space. So if they get a change of vehicles, there is spaces that can be accommodated within that layout for additional vehicles and equipment. What we typically recommend is that you can store that additional equipment in the aisleways of the vehicle storage area, or you can store it in shop areas. So there is accommodations that are anticipated for future expansion without compromising the cost and overbuilding the facility. Paul, I don't know if you want to talk about the attendance building and how they operate now.
Yeah, I think if we did have a facility elsewhere, we would have to have something for the transfer station, meeting room, an area where the staff could change. Right now, they do come over to DPW. Not ideal, but they do have a facility there. So if we were to locate elsewhere, we'd have to find some type of combination for the transfer station workers.
But they'd be able to use the DPW building at your proposed location?
Would they be able? Yes, they would still be able to use that.
Just to follow on to the DPW for a minute, Paul, in your presentation, you talked about the improved maintenance areas, and in there you mentioned latest technology and tools. Are those in the soft costs that we already saw, or will these be additional technologies and tools that you'll have coming down the road?
Yeah, so the Public Works operations is priced a little bit differently or bid a little differently than the fire department operations. So that equipment cost is actually built into the bid fee, the general contractor's cost or the construction cost as we presented it, versus the soft costs for the that were presented for the fire department.
Just so I'm clear, can you tell us which line item it's in? It's in the supplemental package, I believe.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, a great example of DPW equipment would be in the mechanics bay, we'd need some, real lifts, not portable lifts, to lift up vehicles, and that whole system where fluids are stored in a controlled room and then the lines run so they can access them. That's all in the base construction cost. So I believe, I don't have the number in front of me, but wasn't the DPW base construction about
the DPW building
20 million roughly?
22.8 million. It captures that equipment cost that you're referencing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
One last.
Kevin, go ahead.
Okay. My last question I really have is about cost and time. We've got the estimate, which I believe assumes construction 2026?
2026, correct.
So if the town approved, go ahead, could you get started in 2026? And how long would it be? I mean, does that look into, well, it's 8 months to do the DPW, and then you got to demolish, so fire really isn't until 2027 or 2028. Have we really looked into how long it's going to take and how much more it's going to cost when we finally get to it?
Yeah, that's very good questions. So we did anticipate the scheduled duration and the frequency duration. We're estimating, I believe it was like around 24 months for construction. If it was just one building, we'd probably be looking at something more like 16 to 18 months from start to finish. So what we're anticipating is to get started on the design work in the fall, and then have bid-ready documents for the spring.
Taylor MacDonald, Palmer Associates. I didn't get to introduce myself like everybody else, but and so the estimate is to the first quarter of 2026. So that is for a bid number. So that assumes that the contractors that are bidding that are anticipating any increases within that 24-month period as well, too. So that captures everything.
Anyone else? Bob?
Yeah, this was helpful, and I don't think at the moment I have questions, but I do have a couple of comments. First, my usual, I think both the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee has to have a schedule or a document about what else. There's other projects, the school buildings, the whatever else. I think we need a meaningful list and a commitment that the list is accurate to the best of everyone's knowledge and absent a disaster. So if we were contemplating approving a spend, that's it, that's the spend, not coming back next year, not coming back 2 years later, not coming back 3. because I think this is hugely expensive. And I think it's going to be a very tough sled getting approved either by these boards and committees or publicly. So that being said, I'll stick with the theme of what else. I'd like to hear about alternatives that were considered. For example, what if we split these into two projects and don't try to do them at the same time or in the same approved package? What about breaking them up? What would that look like for us? I recognize costs increase as time passes, but it would certainly be, it's always easier to ask for less than for more, right? So I'd like to understand what else. I'd also like to understand, with some specificity, the alternatives considered, right? If I was going to re-roof my home, I could consider 30-year architectural shingles, or I could consider wood, or I could consider metal, and those would all have different costs, different lifespans, different quality, different aesthetics, but they'd be different. And so I'd like to understand, with some degree of specificity, for both of these projects, this, as I understood from the presentation, represents meeting all the identified needs. This is what we need, and I recognize and applaud that that's what we've designed. But what about a make-do version? What would that look like? Perhaps it's not 8 bedrooms or 16 double bedrooms, maybe it's 4, and that changes the cost. And maybe at the DPW shed, there's something else we could do. I suspect that we could see the cheaper but we don't like it version. This is the bare bones minimum version. And I certainly think that the selectmen and the finance committee would be interested in understanding that. And I certainly would suggest as well that taxpayers would be interested in understanding. I think choice is a good thing. I really do. And I think we should contemplate what the choices are and what the alternatives are. So those are sort of at a high level my general comments. I don't remember exactly what the Board of Selectmen asked, but if they asked, or if you asked, what's your current reaction to all of this? My current reaction to all of this as presented would be no. But it was a good presentation and it was very, very informative. Thanks.
If I could just touch on a couple things that Bob said, and I know a lot of it we would have to go back and put something together. I know we've talked internally, you know, to both departments' credit, they want to go together. But if you think about the site, DPW really needs to be demolished and reconstructed somewhere else first, in order to make room for the fire to go where my guess is we all realize that's the best place for it. And we had extensive, I guess what we haven't shown you is there've been like extensive runtime analysis that we paid for early on. Mike and his team, mostly he and Christine, I think literally looked at 15 to 20 different layouts on that site. And when we brought them the 2 other alternative sites, we looked at them multiple ways. One of the things that we should have said just on one of those sites, because the one that we think if DPW had to go elsewhere, the one across from the old Human Services building, new school administration, would make the most sense. But think about that, the entrance to the Forestdale schools there, you guys have seen what that's like when parents go to drop off kids and pick them up at the end of the day. Most likely if DPW is there too, it would need a signal there. So like we haven't looked at a cost of a full signalization of that intersection. That would probably have to be looked at. But no, we could go back and look at that. I think internally as the group, we did say, not that we wanted it to, but like DPW needs to be acted upon first for fire to go where it should.
I'd echo what Bob said about understanding what else. The idea that we've got other major projects on some close horizon, be it the schools or other smaller but still significant projects in municipal facilities. We've got the wastewater. Whatever else will come up, because other things will come up. that to be looking at this project in a silo without also looking at the larger picture of what's ahead of us over the next 10 years or 30 years I think the breakdown you did on the tax estimate over 30 years was good, and I think the different funding mechanisms that might be used are great things to look at, but I think we need to combine other projects into there to say, this is really what we're up against as a town, and then begin to understand how we can prioritize against that. Bob?
Sorry, just one more thing. Savings. Bud, you alluded to the fact that there are potential savings to be realized on the horizon, and you put some numbers to some of it. I would encourage the team to really work on identifying and communicating potential savings and how that's going to impact tax rates and taxpayers, whether it's 2 years out with a consolidation of a response, or it's debt that's rolling off we used to look at those schedules about debt rolling off and sort of have a celebration around the fact that we were no longer spending the money. I would just say, I think another thing the selectmen and the finance committee and ultimately taxpayers would like to hear is where we are cutting costs, where we are recognizing savings, and that it's meaningful and substantial. I think that's all really going to be very, very persuasive. So I would encourage you to, partner with the school system and look for that as well.
But I'd be careful not to mix savings as were presented in the conceptual design when we said we had $480,000 of savings. That's not a real savings the way the public would view it in the way that Bob's looking at it. So I think we need to be very careful as we bring numbers forward, how we define savings in particular.
I just said the two examples that I gave, the debt that's falling off, that's with inside 2.5 for Sandwich Hollows acquisition. In a few months, we'll be working on the FY27 budget, and if the last payment is in FY30, so in 31 it's gone. That's real. And then, without a doubt, like the one we're most excited about on the town side is that regional dispatch that we've worked really hard on for 3+ years to get us to where we can do it. And there's a fourth town that has recently expressed interest that would drive our savings up even higher, meaning our costs would go down even further. And at some point, Chief Keene and Chief Burke should really come in with Heather and I just to explain some of that, because there's a lot of back end things that we're going to benefit from by being like the tertiary backup system. If that regional system, a catastrophic thing happens, it goes down, the sheriff can't do it, and our police department is holding it by, the state's going to pay for all of our capital, for our communication equipment long term. So there's real things that we've worked on really hard and we've had to negotiate with the right employee groups to get to that point. And then one last thing, and I hope this doesn't come across as like, but I can't stress enough, and I know sometimes we get frustrated when we get estimates on projects and then we go out to bid and it comes out higher. Think about every single major project on the town side that we've done over the last 12 years. Every single one has come in on or under budget. We've never had to go back to the voters for more unless we drastically change the scope of work. So the police headquarters, the fire headquarters, East Sandwich, under budget, on budget. The Center for Active Living, the library renovations, on budget. 100 Route 6A, the numbers were right on budget. We never had to come back and ask for anything. Now, we identified what the cost would be, so I don't want to get lumped in that, for example, with the more recent thing, and it wasn't their fault, but when COVID happened and the cost went up so much on the school's recent debt exclusion, and we're not getting done what we wanted to get done. Every large thing that we proposed, we've gotten done for the cost that we said. So we're trying to get honest, accurate estimates, and that's what Mike presented.
Crystal?
And to go back on what you were talking about, Bob, with, the different materials with your roof analogy, when the team met back in January, there was a great slide that we had that this wasn't the final. There was a lot of ways that the initial, going back to the drawing board, cutting costs throughout everything. And there was both on the fire and DPW, where they could, the number of beds, the number of bays, different things like that. And then just recently, we were able to cut, I think, 1.1 million for the elevator. So we, have been going back and forth on where to cut different costs, so this wasn't just the final. This is what it is.
Yeah, I think we're sort of saying the same, well, we're not saying the same thing. We're saying two different points. I recognize that this probably reflected some, sharpening of pencils, but it reflects ultimately what this choice was, right? And what I'm suggesting is there's got to be other choices, right? Like I articulated, not 8 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, right? That's what I'm saying. I'm wondering what the cheaper choice would look like. And if the answer is nothing, it's this or nothing at all, then that's the answer. I get it.
Matt?
So, as I've listened to comments here from selectmen, read comments on Facebook, I think I have some concerns about the cost. And my concerns are obviously how much it costs today, but my larger concern is what it costs the longer we delay. If we talk about, Mike, what are we accounting for inflation per year for construction right now? Is it about 5 to 8?
Between 5 and 8. So
for 58 million today, we're talking 61 million next year. We're talking 65 million the next year. We're talking 69 million the following year. I don't see how we're doing the town a service or the taxpayer a service by delaying to get more information to ultimately need to do something. If we were currently operating out of a adequate fire station and an adequate DPW, I think I would understand all of that. I don't think I've heard anybody with the comments saying that, we don't need this. We don't need the fire station. We don't need the DPW. So that's where my concern comes, that I think we're being maybe a little short-sighted on our pushback. I have no desire to spend $60 million on this project, but I think it is what it is. I think that Chief Burke especially has done a great job of designing something with the consultants, obviously, that is essentially bare bones. I think we can drive one town over and see what a more elaborate fire department looks like, and maybe what a more expensive option would be. And that's not the direction that Chief Burke has pushed us. He has pushed us in a direction that is indicative of his desire for cost savings, and I trust him on that. He grew up in this town. He's been involved in this fire department since he was a very young man. So I think he has our best interests at heart, as do many others that have worked on this. And so I think I am a little concerned that we are kicking the can down the road. I don't think we've kicked the can down the road on this project per se, as we have done. We have undertaken numerous other projects in town over the past decade. We can't take them all on at once. Things fall how they fall. Had we done this project in 2020 rather than Cal, we'd be looking at Cal costing multitudes more. So I could keep droning on about this. It's been a frustration as I listen to comments that I think we all speak in best interests, but I wonder if we're being a little short-sighted on the effect of taxpayer down the road. So I think that's all I have for comments. And I'm sorry, one other. Bud, could you give us a little rundown? You've done this in the past. I don't know if we've done this for Finance Committee. On the history of how we arrived at the need for a third fire station, because this again was driven by some town-wide decision making.
Yeah, it sort of goes back to when we tried, like our ultimate goal when we first presented the original police fire headquarters at Cotuit and Quaker Meeting House was to build one fire substation at the high school site, let the other two go, and only staff those two stations. And I mean, if you think about what Sandwich looks like, it's an upside down triangle with a long part up top. So the tough part is if you live in those areas, at least downtown, you're served by the one fire station that existed other than Forestdale, which we closed and sold. And East Sandwich at that point wasn't even staffed. So I think there was a push when the public said no, and my rough recollection, and I defer to what Chief would recall, I think the capital cost for that was roughly $32 million, I think, would cost, because we would have to build a new station at the high school would have been significant. So the public said no to that debt exclusion. The select board at the time said we wanted to go back to the drawing board, and they told us we wanted to come in under 20 million. And so I'm only looking in the audience because Michael was working with us then, and Taylor was working with us then, and Todd Costa, who couldn't come tonight, was working with us then, and we came up with what we presented. We purposely said we can't touch the downtown headquarters for under 20 million, and we got an approval for 19 million to build the fire headquarters, the police headquarters, and renovate East Sandwich so we could put people there. So while all that was going on, that's when we got that federal grant to hire the 8 people to staff East Sandwich. So, I mean, it was known back then. We weren't touching the old headquarters on 6A, that would have to go be addressed at another point. And you're right. I mean, in hindsight, if we knew the costs would do what they did, we would have done it. We should have done something sooner. And I will say, like, honest to God, if you look, like, we all worked on 2 really huge documents that if I pulled them out, some of you would go like, oh yeah, I remember that. But in 2012, we did this long-range capital plan. The select board, the finance committee, everyone ranked their top 10. I'm just being honest. DPW didn't make the top 10. If you go back and look at that top 10, everything's been done except for one thing. I think it's wastewater. We haven't done wastewater. And 2/3 or 3/4 of the fire was done, not 100%. So, and then we updated that in 2018. We updated all our numbers. We reprioritized our list. And I think that gave us the impetus to do what we ended up doing the last like 10 years, where we've knocked off like 4 or 5 projects. So it's good in the sense that we made headway, but it's fair to say DPW was lower on the list, and we need to do something.
Nancy.
Thank you. It was around, I don't know, last year sometime, a year or so ago, and I remember asking, what about splitting these? And I was given a hard no, that it wasn't, the site was where it should be. Now I see you did look at some alternate sites, although I kind of feel like they were skimmed over quite quickly. And we just kind of talked about the one across from Oak Ridge, and maybe having a light isn't a bad thing, because you're probably going to end up looking at maybe a light on 130. I mean, that's a state road, isn't it? You'd have to work with them. So you're going to have fire, you probably need some of those lights where, they allow the traffic to stop. So I don't feel like that's a breaker. So just having, there's a lot of questions I know out in town about, do they have to be in the same place? And I'm not totally convinced that it's been explained that they have to be in the same place, that an alternate location for the DPW isn't okay. And I think somebody mentioned, could they be done at different times? And of course now you are kicking somebody down the road. But our voters turned down a 1% addition on the WIF on their taxes, and this is like way more than that. I mean, clearly you'd have to do an awful lot of schooling and education, and I don't think there was enough of it on the WIF to explain why that was a good idea or not. And this is going to be a lot of like, I mean, every one of us who have seen these locations, like you said, nobody says you don't need this. I mean, that's just how it is. The timeline, I had the timeline, and then I guess we're looking at a huge increase in the taxes, and most of the people say, I can't afford it. So that's the reality that has to be looked at, regardless of the need. And I think the need is there, but the reality is people say, I can barely afford to live here. How am I going to afford this? And I don't know the answer to that.
So Nancy, fully understand your sentiment from the taxpayer perspective. I do think it's our job to have that in the back of our head, but I also think it's our job to present the public with what they're needed and the best path to get there. And of course, that's why it does go to the ballot box, it does go to town meeting. Our committees aren't unilaterally making a decision that we're going to spend $58 million of taxpayer money. We're making a recommendation that that it's the best course of action for the town needs, I think is what we're doing. And so I completely agree with your sentiments. It's a ton of money. I hate the idea of it. I hope to be able to make the 30th payment. I'm young enough that I hope I can. So I think it's a huge investment. And again, my concern is if we don't do it today, what does it look like in 5 years, in 10 years, and what is the overall cost of the town at that point? And as I was thinking to Bob's point about what else is coming down the road, I agree with Bob completely. Best practices, I think, would be to have full understanding of what else is coming down the road. I think we're trying to do that, but I still have a hard time reconciling if the school is going to ask for a whole bunch of money for upgrades, what does that have to do with DPW and fire and their operations? I think needs are needs. If there's a storm coming down the road, we have to find ways to fund it all. And otherwise, we have to make really hard decisions on what are we sacrificing.
I'm sure your committee talked about splitting or not splitting, and I guess I'm not there that this has been answered.
Yeah, and I'm happy to say I was an advocate of moving the DPW to a different site for site work reasons. I think we looked at that, and it was shown to me satisfactorily, I guess, that by moving to the Quaker Meeting House site, we do incur additional costs at the transfer station for an additional building, I guess, for the staff there, and we lose some of the benefits of having the shared use site with the bedrooms and the meeting spaces that JJ has talked about. And so once we move sites, I think we do save some money. I was doing some math as we were presenting. It seemed like maybe we could save possibly about $2 million going to a different site, but we're going to incur an additional $1.5 million to $2 million in cost elsewhere. And so you go, what's the difference? If we incur the cost, we incur the cost, if that's the concern. Looking at the schematic plans, I believe we have some retainage for the fire department as well. So I don't think by moving from the Route 130 site to Quaker Meeting House, I don't think we save the full $2 million in site-specific excavation costs. So I don't know. I never asked what the breakdown of site-specific costs from fire station to DPW is, but I think we still have some of that. So I think point is, I think it has all been looked at. I'm sure Mike can give more information to make us comfortable.
Jim.
Thank you, and I too want to thank everybody. Although it might be town needs, and we all understand it's town needs, I don't think that's really this board's charge. I think our charge as finance committee is more the town taxpayer than the town needs. I think town needs falls on board of selectmen, and we really need to look at the finances of it. And to that end, not only is it important to look at where we're going with future projects, is there a way to see where we've been with past projects, maybe the last projects, what they've increased for the taxpayer and how much is still left. That way, I think we have a better idea of what exactly we've asked of taxpayers in the last 10 years or so. And the other question I had is, as to the current location for the fire station, I imagine the plan is to sell that. Do we have any estimates of what that might possibly bring in to offset costs?
This goes back to a town property study committee about 5 years ago, and as you guys know, once the new headquarters was built for police, we abandoned on 6A, and there's a veterans group working out of there now. The recommendation then was, for the most value, you really needed to combine the two parcels on 6A. Don't separate them. There'd be a lot more value if you sold both at the same time. And then the other part, which again, we don't necessarily control, is if sewers goes by the front, it makes the properties much more valuable than if it didn't. So we haven't gotten a new estimate since like 5 years ago, but I would think, if sewering was there and if those parcels could be combined and sold as one, that's like a prime spot for a small business area because it's zoned for that on 6A.
Thank you.
That would have to be raised and they could park underneath, but they,
Jackie.
Yeah, I know the title of the project is shared use, and I did see that some of the shared, the way we envision sharing use of the two facilities is bedrooms and potentially training space and staff space. Are there any other shared use that we could really leverage as we describe why it's important that they're next to each other and
So one of the things we didn't mention is storm coordination. So in all reality, when there's a snowstorm, I'm not going to take a shot at the police, but it's really DPW and fire that do a lot of the coordination for debris removal, response. And one of the things Paul and I talked about was having that training room be the storm response center for both departments to be able to coordinate tree removal, road clearing. We have access to the power company now, where what we do now through the EOC and through virtual EOC is we talk to each other, but it's literally sitting there with a TV screen to look at everything that's out there and coordinate power restoration, road clearing. All of that is really one of the primary shared use that we probably should have highlighted a little better. But with the co-location, that's one of the benefits that we would definitely have.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think one of the things that, as we talk about, presenting this, if in fact we're convinced that this is the best route and these are the best numbers, then the discussion really moves to how do we talk to the taxpayers about the choices that they're about to make and the votes they're about to take. And I think I'm not hearing a lot about them in this presentation. What is our expected population growth over time? What are the needs of the community? How does what do we expect for storm surge in the next 10 years? What do the projections show us? Are we going to become a Texas where we face a terrible tragedy because we haven't invested in a siren system and that was a municipal decision? Are we going to be that town in the future? And I think those are the kinds of things that we want to highlight more here. By having a shared command center for storms, what does that buy us? By having your access onto Route 6 in both directions, what do we expect for response times? I mean, in some of those out neighborhoods. So if those neighborhoods, what's the current response time? Are we at 8 minutes and we expect to move to 5 minutes? Are we at 12 minutes and that's completely unacceptable? Those are the kinds of things that people are going to need to hear if we're going to, I think, make some headway on this.
Yeah, and the response times, we do have those numbers, and it's about 3 minutes. You look at in all directions having that highway access. And again, I emphasize strongly Chase Road, Old County Road, East Sandwich, where that station is out. It's coming from downtown right now. That's 9 minutes plus. If it's a Sunday or a Friday, try to navigate traffic. Your average speed's 30 miles an hour, where you normally think it's 45, 50 with apparatus. Having the highway access, even with traffic, you can split the highway at 30 miles an hour. It's at least 3 minutes off. We've run those numbers. And to put in context for the committee, we did simulations on actual calls. So we took the calls from 2023, 2024, overlaid them on the new location with the simultaneous calls and got the numbers. So they're pretty direct, using the real data. So the real calls coming in, you get that second call. What does it look like from this location? What does it look like from this location? The other thing I forgot to mention, we would relocate the captain to this new station because of the SUV pickup truck. He or she could get everywhere very quickly. They're coming out of Quaker and Katuitt now. They have those thoroughfares. They can make good time. But imagine them being in that location. That's part one. Part two, when the ambulance goes out for a downtown call, there's a fourth person in that building to respond to the second call that's downtown. Because right now, the captain's at Quaker Meeting House in Katuitt. The ambulance goes to the nursing home. There's a second call in Town Neck. It's coming from East Sandwich. And there's not another person there. Go ahead.
Just because you're on a roll and you're talking about what I was going to bring up, could you talk about how important it is to get the ladder truck to this location?
Yes, so the ISO, we're rated by the Insurance Service Organization. We get a maximum of 5 points when your ladder truck is in the appropriate district. We only get 2.5 points because it's not here. When you look at the buildings, Sham Heights 1 and 2, the new wing school property, the power plant, all of those are in what we call District 1. Not having the ladder truck here, we are deducted points. The ladder truck needs to be downtown. These are the quote-unquote high-rise buildings that we have, and we want to maximize our ISO credit. What does that mean to you and I? Residential insurance rates, it's not significant. I'm not going to sit here and tell you you're going to save hundreds of dollars. It may be $10. The benefit is on the commercial side. Our commercial insurance payers downtown here, power plant, Stop and Shop, they save significant, 10, 15%. They're paying significant rates. That's a significant amount of savings. That's why ISO is so important and why commercial properties pay such close attention to fire department staffing, because they can and have the ability to save a significant amount of money. So that's why we can get the ladder truck here. That's the goal, to maximize that.
Yeah, thank you. I had that exact question. When you talk about those ratings, that's a little bit obtuse in terms of like the taxpayer saying, what do I care whether I'm 1.5 or 0.2.5? And I think if you can appeal to some of the commercial sites, that's one thing. I guess my final comment here is we seem to be in a place where it's a bit of bad timing as well with the WIF. Fast approaching, and we do need to pull back the lens and talk about the next 10, 20, 30 years and what the taxpayers are going to face, the average tax bill, and what and what they're willing to do. I think that is important, and I wondered to that end if, for example, we were to come back and say, what can you do if the number was 45 million for both? Like, just what could you do? What's possible then? Is that an exercise? I don't think, if I understand Heather correctly, we have a lot of excess budget to do that. But is that an exercise that can be done so that we can get a sense of what's the Kia, what's the Honda, and what's the Lexus? And I think that is, that is an important tool in the tool belt. Have we even thought about that?
Thank you. So we've actually had towns ask us that exact question, and we've done it when towns ask us to build to a number. And I would say it gets very dangerous building to a number in terms of program, because usually that's what gets cut first. Is in order to take, we're talking just round numbers here, $15 million out of this project, you're going to cut programs. So you're going to cut needs that each department has. So we just had to do this in a town that we're working in now. It was actually almost identical. The number was around 60. And right before we were about to finish design development, they came back and said, make it 38. And we spent another year redesigning the entire project. And we had to, in this case too, the DPW and the fire had to take significant cuts to their building to make it work. Now, that's obviously something that needs to be talked about. It's a very broad spectrum, but I'm sure the number can come down. Just to make it come down that much is a difficult thing to do without them both losing things that they would probably need, or spaces that they would definitely need. So, you know, the storage for vehicles would need to shrink down. The bunks probably need to be cut. You know, you'd have to look at things in a pretty wide spectrum. So it is something that is asked, you know, from time to time. So it's not something that can't be done. It's just, you know, I think there's concessions that would certainly need to be made. One other thing I wanted to talk about was the splitting of the two projects as well. I think not only the shared usage of the buildings, but I think you need to look at it in terms of the infrastructure that's coming into the site. So they're sharing utilities. There'll be drainage that they're sharing as well. If we were to, you know, split them up and move them, and also general conditions, so just the contractor that's bidding that project, rather than having, you know, paying overhead and profit on two projects, you're paying it on one. You know, it's not a one-to-one scenario, but there is a savings there. If we were to break them up and you needed a set of lights, if you're looking at a set of lights on a state road, it's easily $500K. The whole thing comes down to time. I would say that majority of towns now are looking to group these projects because time has been the biggest commodity on all of these because of the pricing craziness that's going on, right? So you might save up front by doing one project, but it'll come back to bite you when you try to get that other project. You'll end up paying more. We just had a town put down a set of plans in 2003 because they had some issues with land. Their project was about $32 million construction cost. They just picked that project back up in 2025. It's just south of $40 million construction cost. So it went up 11%, you know, in 2 years. So they're real costs that you know, towns are experiencing. So obviously it may make sense in the short term to ungroup them, but you really do get obviously a better value by keeping the projects together at this point.
Jeff, I understand you had your hand up.
Yes, yeah, yes. And I know you've been calling on separate individuals and giving them time. So I didn't want to interrupt your process, but I just wanted to let you know I did have some comments I wanted to make.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for letting me sit through this as a new member. You know, the old saying, you're drinking from a fire hose. I think I got the general sense of the history here, and I'll continue to move forward on that. Ed, I got a process question. I've got probably a couple dozen questions that I wrote on each of the pages as these presentations were made. And I don't think we want to spend another hour for me to get an answer on each of the questions. What's the process? Can I take this presentation to the fire department or to DPW, Chief Burke or the director, and meet with them and get answers to my questions? Because I truly have on every page a question, and some of them may have been answered by others, and they're all related to trying to understand the cost. So it's not just spelling or these are questions I have, which for me go towards the cost. So what's the process?
I believe the best process would be that you submit those questions to both myself and Bill Jennings, and then we'll farm them out to the appropriate people and then bring them back with answers to the full committee.
Okay. If we have to do that, I'll do it. What I don't like about that process, one is the amount of time I'm going to have to spend writing up all these questions. Two, when you sit across from someone and you ask them a question, their answer may answer your question or may not, which leads to another question. So now I'm going to write up all these questions. I'm going to get the answers. I'm going to have to write up another set of questions. I'm going to get the answers. I'm going to have to write up another set. So I will do it that way. I hate that process. Just so you know.
And certainly if Bill and others feel there's a need to invite somebody back to the committee, we'd invite them back if we feel that that type of back and forth might occur. Bill?
Jeff, if it helps you, if you want to scan, what you have written down, I'd be happy to take it from there for you. As long as I could read your writing, I'd be happy to do that for you if that helps you at all.
It doesn't help because it's nomenclature. You know what I'm saying? I have to write out the question. I know what it means because what it said, I wrote the word Phillips, but you're not going to know what that means unless I write out what it means. So that doesn't work. But okay, I have to find time to do that. Okay, so that's my process question. From a finance point of view, I gather we sort of do a couple of things here. As I said, I'm new to this committee that go beyond just finance. I've heard a lot of comments tonight that just went beyond finance, and I understand that. I don't think the argument is, does the DPW have to be addressed? Does fire have to be addressed? I don't think there's any argument there. I think there is a question about how, and that's what a lot of my questions go to. Are we taking the appropriate, the right way to do it? This argument of a shared site, I heard the benefits, I see it written down. I'm not convinced that the value you get offsets the pain yet. And what I mean by that is, this comment is made, gee, if we don't do this project now, it's going to cost more in the future. Well, that's true of all projects. I mean, if money was infinite, we would do all the projects now and avoid all those costs in the future. So it's all about phasing. One thing I'd like to see, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, and Bud alluded to it, and I think Bud could put it together, is a fall off chart, both inside the 2.5 and outside the 2.5. What projects are we paying for that fall off over time? And that shows you where you can bring on new projects. I think that would be very beneficial from a finance point of view to understand, maybe we do want to phase these. Maybe we have to first go with DPW and then address the fire. And this is how we make it fit, by looking what's falling off and what's coming. And yes, is there going to be a cost to do that? Absolutely. There's always a cost to do something in the future versus now. That's life. I mean, that's true of our home renovations. It was mentioned earlier. It's all about timing and being able to afford it and staying within your budget as you go forward. So, that's one comment. I'd like to see that. I'd like to have a better understanding of what's going to fall off and how do we phase it in, and is that a possibility? Because I don't think we've answered that question fully yet. Should we be phasing these versus going all hell at them right now? The other thing in that phase off that we should do is that inside 2.5, there's a growth to what I'll call the recurring piece. Due to inflation and due to other costs and so forth, that has to be included in this. You can't truly see what the taxes are going to do unless you account for that. Stuff's going to fall off, the taxes are going to improve because it falls off, but we got things coming on just through inflation, and then we may already have some other projects that are already scheduled. You got to build that so we can all understand it. Maybe that's something you want to present to the residents. Maybe it's something you want to put out there for everybody. I don't know, but at least these committees, I think we need to have that as we go forward. I'm not convinced, this question about, and a little bit about my background. I've been on some very large capital projects. I've chaired some very large capital projects. This argument, and I understand, and I apologize, I don't know all the names, and I've worked with a lot of construction consultants. This idea that, you give me a number, we'll get there. Sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you got to say, you know what, this 60s, this is crazy, folks. What can we do for 45? And all of a sudden, some wild stuff comes out. and I mean wild in a good way. One thing from my experience, those site costs, being 20% I roughed it out, 20% of the cost, that's high. Now, there are sites that cost that much to prepare to 20%, but that's high. Better would be a lot better if we could get it down around 10%, would be a lot better balance and so forth. So, and I don't fully understand, having just tonight, what's driving those site costs. But I would challenge that and say, what can we do differently? Maybe it has to go to 2 sites to get the site cost down. And you drive the site cost down, and now you start to look at those 2 sites. The other thing is, and I see the benefit of these bunk rooms, of the space for the employees. The question there is also phasing. So, sometimes you put infrastructure in place and build it out later. And I know the build out later is going to cost money, but again, it's all about timing. When can we afford it? So maybe we need to do some infrastructure that is, okay, we only get half the space we need right now for the bunks, but we left this side of the building in such a way that you can easily just add on an extension. And it's, the site's already prepared, the basic infrastructure is there. The HVAC knew it was going to be expanded 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, whatever. I don't know if any of that thinking's going on. That thinking needs to go on because this number is too high. And those are ways that you get numbers down, and the costs come later. You're not avoiding the cost, but you're timing the cost. And you got to do that on projects this size when you're calling for money, and make it fit. So, I'd like to see a better understanding, of that as we go forward. This idea of everything has to be undercover. That's a nice goal. Everything is undercover, but it may not be practical. I drive, as you sure you do, I drive by a lot of commercial, private companies. They don't store everything undercover, and they survive, and they work. I've driven by military depots. They don't store everything undercover. There's a balance you have to strike. And I think I heard during the presentation, you're going to put all the plows, the plows that come off the machines, you're going to put them undercover, I think I heard. I'm not sure why I understand the benefit of doing that. I'm not sure I understand the cost of doing it, though, and that we should do it. I saw in the presentation, an open canopy area. I like that because from a cost point of view, it's cheaper to build an open canopy. Gives you some relief from weather, doesn't give you full relief, but it's a good way to store vehicles. I wouldn't suggest you do repairs and maintenance under open canopy, but you could store. Are we utilizing enough open canopy versus everything inside 4 walls? I don't know. It's a question I have, and I'll write it up and I'll ask, and we'll see what we're doing. But that would help drive costs. It appears to me, and I'm just, hey, this is my first time looking at it. I've read some of the backup documents and so forth, but really just hearing it. It appears there's some opportunity here if we get creative, not to totally avoid the cost, but balance the cost that can make this project go forward. Because the alternative is we go to town meeting and it gets voted down. We have kicked the can down the road in a negative way, as opposed to taking on a majority of the cost now and phasing in the rest later as we go forward. So I don't know if these are kind of comments you want to hear. I don't know if these are kind of comments a finance committee is supposed to do. From my perspective and my background in finance, it's the kind of questions I always ask on capital projects and looked at and went forward. The challenge you have to make, great presentations, a lot of good work. And maybe all this information's out there, but it's just not been made available yet. But it needs to be made available to answer these kinds of questions. So again, thank you for your time. I'm glad to be on the committee. I hope I can add some value. And I'm not looking forward to writing up all my questions, but I'll do it.
Well, I apologize for that, but thank you for your comments. And just so you know, in my opinion, and I think it's generally the way the Finance Committee's worked for the years that I've been on it, that all questions are fair questions. There's nothing that is really out of scope, just given that generally what we are looking at all have financial and economic impacts on the town. So I think all questions are fair game.
I wasn't indicating anything was out of scope. It's just, you have to balance your time, right? I mean, we've
Oh,
been
yeah,
at-
yeah, balance time's important,
we've
absolutely.
been at this for 3 hours, and what are we trying to achieve in the meeting? What's the purpose of the meeting, and so forth. That's all I meant.
Thank you. Anybody else at this point? Kevin?
One last one, and it just goes back to the site and the thoughts, and I know you put a lot of thought into locations, but if you looked at this project as 2 separate projects, DPW first, then fire department later, just for DPW, would you have selected the site you selected to build it? Or would you have thought of a different site? If it was just DPW building, is that where you would have picked? Yeah.
Paul, grab a mic, please.
I mean, I'm thinking the size, the slopes.
Yeah, I think it's a good site in terms of location near the train station and landfill. Easy access for some of our deliveries coming from off Cape, really close. We get better prices from some of the contractors for materials because we're close. So for those reasons, it's a good location. Is it the best location in terms of providing optimum space? No, it's not.
And is it too much of a concession, that site? And I just want you to kind of just step back as you're doing it and just think, like, is that where I really want to be? Now, once you're someplace other than where you are, JJ's moving in. But I like having the 2 together. I see benefits to having it for shared space. I'm just worried about you not getting what you need and the extra cost associated with that site.
Valid point, and I appreciate your perspective on that.
Crystal?
And just one little comment on everyone's talking about the location and the site and everything. Chief, could you talk a little bit about the reason why that was chose for the elevation with the tower? Because I think that's kind of a good point to talk about as well.
Yeah, so obviously the highway access is one, but radio communications, the way Sandwich is laid out, so Oak Ridge is the highest point on Cape Cod, 276 feet above sea level, where Spalding Hospital is, that ridge along the service road. For backup microwave communication, you need antenna-to-antenna connection. Downtown's in a hollow. East Sandwich is in a hollow. That's a ridge. That's why, I don't want to be in the hole. I wanted to be elevated. To put 40, 60-foot antenna up there, now we're getting good coverage with Quaker Meeting House Road and Katuitt. You can look to expand cellular coverage on those same towers down the road. It's just sited well for communications, and that was one of the other added benefits was the elevation that we could put a tower on there.
Thank you.
Bud?
If I could just point out a couple things just really quickly, just to maybe help give us more focus on what you'd like us to come back with, and the select board as well. So just a couple really quick things. We have all sorts of graphs of our debt schedule going back to the late 80s to the 90s. We used to put it in your budget binder every year, and then we talked about what could we take out that we don't look at it much, and that was one of the things that people identified. But literally, if you look at tab 7 that we give you every year, is the full treasurer's debt schedule by project. Everything's in there. Now, we can easily turn that into a nice graph so you can see what it looks like, what we have today. Just trying to go back to some of the questions that came up about the bigger picture things coming forward. And I can't stress enough when it comes to wastewater, we're not the driver. We know what we need to do eventually. We don't know exactly when we're going to need to do it. For example, and I think we tried to highlight this all through the spring when we were talking about what would the 1% do, what does the existing 2% do. I want to stress what I said back then. The 2% will cover the engineering, the permitting of our conveyance and collection system, and then ultimately a design of a treatment system, and there's a lot of permitting involved, and the same thing with disposal. So all those 3 big picture costs, we'll be able to cover from the WIF projections that we have today. Where it gets difficult is when are we going to have to go and actually build and put those things in place? How long will it be stretched out? So if you look at, and I know you get copied on it, and I can forward this to you tomorrow, like we had Wright Pierce do a really good high-level picture of, you know, if we had to build it on our own without using the base, and then 3 different options if we could use the base, depending on what legally we're told we can, you know, what other sources of funding we can capture. But I'm telling you today, like, we won't be asking people for $150 million in 5 years. But in 10 years, we're going to have to ask people for authorization to spend up to $150 million, just like every other single town on Cape Cod has had to do, and the vast majority of them have been successful. There's no getting around that. We're going to have to do it, but I can't tell you today exactly what the number is and exactly when we're going to ask. And on the school things, you know, we've been trying to get feedback from engineering firms and other, and I'm just going to be clear, the firm that we talked to today that Dr. Maruschak mentioned, we asked them to give us a quote on looking at these 2 buildings on what would it cost to upgrade them, and the quote we got back was $46,000 to do 2 small buildings like that don't even equate to probably 30,000 square feet. Each of our schools are like 200-something thousand square feet. What's that price going to be? So I'm just saying, I don't think, maybe we were looking for more detail in this project, this effort, than what we're going to get with what Dr. Maruschak said. But, you know, if we think it's going to be like $200,000 and we can fund it from our existing budgets, I don't know. I'm skeptical, but we'll see what they give us. And then we have to ask for the money. Then they told us it's going to take 6 months. So we can give you the best estimate we can on the things we control, but the stuff we don't know, it's going to be a while. And don't forget, the last time we had a big study like this done, and I know you've heard me say it, I hate reiterating it, the estimate came back $25 million. Select Board and Finance Committee dropped it to 5. They didn't want to ask the public for 5. They cut it to 2.5. They asked the public, it got turned down. They cut it in half again to like 1.3 or 1.6. That's what the public funded. So when people say, how come you didn't do that $25 million in repairs? Well, you gave us less than $2 million. We couldn't do it. And then we make the best of it, like we always do. And that's the other thing. Like, if none of this ever goes forward, you know, those 2 people over there, their staff, and all of us will do everything we can to provide the best service we can to the public, like we always do.
At the start of this conversation, Bud said that we don't have to have all our answers back or all our feedback in one go-round. So that's been on my mind throughout the evening, given all of the comments that I think at least is a start for Bud and team and the Board of Selectmen, hopefully. But I would suggest, perhaps in light of Jeff spending some time on his list of questions and us getting responses, that perhaps we meet in about a month's time, or we find a date that's acceptable to all of us, and plan accordingly to perhaps continue that discussion. Selectman.
Quick question.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What's the timetable to put this before the town?
Yeah, the Select Board hasn't decided.
The question was, what's the timetable to put it before the town?
Yeah, the Select Board hasn't decided yet, yeah.
Selectman George, you have a microphone there? Excellent.
Okay, works. I'm Robert George, 401 Service Road, and for the people at home, I'm one of the Board of Selectmen. The other night at our meeting, we talked about this, and what I'm going to present to you tonight, I said I'd bring it to you, the board, tonight. And our board said, well, we had voted a month ago to bring the whole project to you and see what your thoughts were. So I've heard a lot of talk tonight, and a lot of it relates to what I came up with. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a consultant, just common sense. If you look at your cost estimate sheet, that's where I got my numbers from. Okay? You look at the first one, it's just about $10 million. Okay? So what I looked at is where they want to put this building is in a hole. Okay, I managed the property up behind this property for many, many years. I know that property like the back of my hand. It's one hell of a hole. So what my thoughts are is keep the DPW on the site that they're on now. Don't put the new building in the hole. You're going to save almost $10 million right off the bat. The gentleman said over here there's room for expansion. So if you tear the existing DPW building down, put up a new one to meet their needs, you're going to save $10 million right off the bat. Okay, if you look the next item down, moving the fuel island. On the overall project, they were going to move the fuel island for $1 million. So we leave the fuel island right where it is. We save $1 million. Now we're up to $10 million we're going to save on the project. Let's see, the salt shed, okay? I've been watching the projects across the street at the state DPW. They just redid both their salt sheds, and I'm sure it didn't cost $1 million. So we put some money into our salt sheds, and we save another $1 million. So I think we're up to $12 million now. Okay? What I did is I took the soft cost, was over $12 million, and I split that up in a third. So in the end result here, you'll see that I gave 1/3 to the DPW building and cut $8 million off the soft cost. Okay? The fire department building is $10 million. So what I did is I came up with a figure of $30,463,000, okay, with all the stuff I just talked about. So you take the $58 million and you subtract the $30+ million, that gives you a balance of $27,727,000. The DPW building is $22 million. Okay? So if you take the 27, you take the DPW building for $22 million, that gives you a balance left over of almost $5 million. So what I'm saying is, let's take this project, split it. Okay? I've been plagued on the street, I've been plagued by phone calls, people call me saying, we're not going to vote for this. What are you, crazy? Our tax bills are going to go up. We're all going to be on fixed income. I can look at everybody right here. By the time you're done paying for this project, you're going to be on a fixed income. Okay? People are moving out of the town. My tax bill is going to go up $200 in August. Okay? So people aren't going to vote for it. It's going to go down in flames. I've had not one person come to me and say, hey, we're going to vote for that. So if we split the project, we go ahead and get our DPW. We know we've got to take care of that. We've got to take care of that building. We need a new building. So if we split it, get that building done, we look at the fire chief and we say, Chief, is there any other place in town that we can put a fire station up? Of course there is. The power plant would love to have that new fire station on their property, and they've got a ton of property there. Okay, their insurance would go right down. All right? I spent 48 years in the fire department. I know ins and outs. I know what the run times are. I've been all over this town thousands of times. We need to get that fire station out of there, get those guys out of there. It got flooded a couple of years ago, water all the way around. We had 4 dispatchers, 4 women. All 4 of them got cancer. Some of them passed away. Okay? I know there's mold in that building. We've dealt with it for years, insulation and stuff. So it's time to get the building out of there. We need to get out of that building. And the highway needs the building. Fire department needs to get moved out of there. If we sell both the police and fire, that money, I think, Bud, can go into some of the costs of the new structures we want to put up. So let's not waste any more time. Don't go to the November town meeting with both these articles because they're not going to pass. So let's separate them. Let's go forth with the DPW. The figures I've done here. Take out that site work. That's ridiculous. Put that building over in the hole. Keep them right where they are. There's room for expansion. We know that. Let's do it. Fire chief can come up with another plan for another building somewhere else. Let him come back to us, and then we can continue on with that. So, Mr. Gurn talked about cost. That it is cost. People just aren't going to pay it. They don't want to pay it. They're tired of it. So this is our last big municipal project we've got. Just these two buildings, and we've done well on our other ones over the years. We've managed it. The town they stood behind us, supported us, but they're not going to support us on this one here. So that's my recommendation. You people can do what you want, basically. It's your decision, but think about it, and I think we can get the project moving forward if we go ahead and take these recommendations I did, and it makes sense. We're going to save a lot of money. So thank you.
Thank you. Just to follow up on Jim's point about when this might come before, if we did meet a month out to continue the discussion, does that work?
Yeah, I mean, the board hasn't even talked about holding a special yet.
Okay. Yeah. So, Jackie.
Yeah, I did listen to the select board meeting last month, and there was a suggestion about public comment. I really think that, so we don't waste more time talking among the committees, there's got to be some injection of public comment so there's a gauge on, where the public is right now. I think various of the committees have gotten feedback from constituents and taxpayers, but I think we really need that voice, and I don't know what that looks like, but I did want to say that I seconded that.
I think one of the questions perhaps we could address during our discussion in a few weeks out would be, what should a public forum look like? It would be my sense. But with that, thank you, Selectman George, for advancing us on public comments. Does anyone else with us tonight have public comment before we wrap up? Seeing none, does anybody have any old business? Does anybody have any new business? Not at this point. So with that, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you again to our guests for being with us. We will plan another meeting in about a month, that we'll see how that agenda comes together. Do I have a motion to adjourn? And remember, we have to take a roll call to end. Jim?
Move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn from Jim.
Second.
Second by Crystal. Crystal?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Matt? Yes. Kevin?
Yes. And yes.
And Jeff?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Unanimous on adjourning. Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Good night.